The Quiet Signal, a novel of mystery, science fiction, and psychological suspense. Drizzle traced the mullioned glass of the university office, blurring the dim glow of street lamps into trembling orbs of amber. Inside, Dr. Alistair Finch sat encased in a stubborn quiet, fingers drumming against the grain of a time-worn desk scattered with open journals and star charts. The scent of old paper mingled with the faintest trace of damp wool from his corduroy jacket. The fabric faded along the elbows from years of thoughtful pacing. Outside, the rain whispered a steady cadence against stone walls, wrapping the evening in a muted embrace. The soft click of the computer's incoming message broke the stillness. Finch's eyes lifted from a notebook, narrowing as a government seal pulsed discreetly on the screen. An encrypted summons, terse and anonymous, from the Ministry of Defense. No explanation, only a date, time, and a forbidding address nestled in the heart of London. He allowed himself a brief inhale, the faint metallic tang of the office and the distant rumble of trains threading through the night pressing upon him. Resisting the impulse to dismiss the message, he saved it carefully, the weight of its gravity settling like sediment in his chest. He rose, stretching long limbs, stiffened from hours bent over equations and star maps. The room smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth drawn in through an open window, mingling with the warmth of his tea cooling beside scattered notes. A practiced ritual, the careful layering of meaning beneath data points, the slow unraveling of cosmic mysteries that had defined his life. Yet tonight that ritual seemed fragile, an uncertain thread tethering him to his quiet routines. The summons beckoned something else, an unspoken invitation into shadows. The journey to London unfolded beneath a sky thick with clouds and intermittent downpours. Finch moved through puddled streets, his shoes clicking softly on wet pavements, lined with the slick sheen of rain. The murmur of distant traffic wove between the hollow arches of lamplit alleys. He felt the familiar rhythm of the city's breath, steady and unyielding, as he approached the address. A stark, unmarked building whose anonymity seemed deliberate, designed to fade into the grey, urban fabric. The entrance loomed without fanfare, a steel door chilled under his fingertips as he stepped inside. The air shifted. Sterile and conditioned, it lacked the comforting aroma of his office's aging books and electronics. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a pale wash against polished concrete floors and nondescript walls. Finch's footsteps echoed, measured and deliberate, each step a quiet assertion in the cavernous, anonymous space. A voice, calm and impeccably modulated, greeted him from a small chamber beyond a security gate. "Dr. Finch, we've been expecting you." The door slid open smoothly, and he walked into a room where Sir Malcolm Sterling awaited. Sterling sat behind a vast desk, his posture impeccable, his dark suit immaculately tailored, the sheen of polished shoes catching the light. The faint scent of leather and a trace of cologne lingered in the air, precise and controlled, mirroring the man himself. Sterling's eyes held a quiet intensity beneath well-groomed brows. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a matter of utmost discretion, one that demands your particular expertise." His voice was low, measured, never rising above a conversational tone, carrying a weight that filled the room without force. Finch noted how every word seemed chosen to convey both authority and a restrained urgency, as if the balance of the world teetered on the edge of their conversation. Before Finch could respond, Sterling produced a thin envelope, its paper thick and textured, embossed with a seal long forgotten by public records. He slid it across the desk with deliberate care. Inside you will find a photograph dated 1986. We believe your knowledge could illuminate its origins. Finch's fingers hovered momentarily before peeling back the flap, revealing a grainy black and white image, edges curling slightly with age. The photograph depicted a field under a slate-grey sky, a solitary figure standing amid indistinct shapes, faint halos of light hovering just above the ground. Finch's breath caught in the silence, a quiet ache stirring as memories flickered beneath the surface. The date aligned with a fragment of childhood recollection, a night long buried yet never forgotten. He traced the contours of the image, the blurred forms echoing in his mind like a half-remembered dream. Sterling's gaze remained steady. We call it the quiet signal. It's been studied, contained, and concealed for decades. The government's silence has been a shield for a fragile order. We need someone who can approach this with both scientific rigor and discretion. Finch felt the slow draw of responsibility, a tether pulling him from the periphery into a core he had not dared to consider before. The room seemed to grow still, the sterile hum of the building fading into the background as Finch wrestled with the weight of Sterling's proposal. A life of quiet observation, of nights spent staring into the cosmos, searching for answers, suddenly poised on the brink of something immeasurably larger and deeper than any star. The familiar patterns of equations and charts, now interlaced with shadows, barely glimpsed. He placed the photograph gently atop the desk, meeting Sterling's eyes with a calm steadiness that belied the turmoil beneath. "If this is true," he said, voice low and deliberate, "then the implications reach far beyond anything I have encountered. I will accept. But I will need time, resources, and freedom to pursue the truth wherever it leads." There was a pause, then a subtle nod from Sterling, the first crack in his otherwise immovable facade. Sterling reached into a drawer and extracted a slim dossier bound in dark blue leather. "You will find everything you need here. The Agency for the Protection of the Realm and Occurrences, APRO. It has existed in the margins, its mission obscured. Until now." Finch's gaze flicked to the initials, stamped in silver on the cover. The weight of a hidden history pressing down. They rose simultaneously, the silent exchange of purpose sealed in the quiet gesture. Sterling extended a hand, the grip firm but respectful. The unspoken pact settled between them like the slow turning of a tide, an irrevocable current pulling them towards unknown depths. Finch felt the familiar impulse to pace, the old habit reasserting itself as he stepped back, fingers brushing the lapels of his corduroy jacket. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, the night air cool and sharp against his cheeks as he exited into the London streets. The city's endless pulse thrummed beneath his feet, a labyrinth of secrets and stories stretching out in all directions. Finch walked slowly, the photograph folded carefully in his pocket, the quiet signal now a quiet, persistent echo beneath the hum of the world. The chill of the evening seeped into his bones, blending with the steady rhythm of his breath. Somewhere in the dark, unseen depths stirred a presence ancient and vast, its intentions inscrutable yet undeniably present. Finch's mind traced the lines connecting past and present, memory and mystery, as the rain whispered on stone and glass, carrying the faintest hint of something waiting to be heard. He returned to his office in the small hours, the city finally stilling into a fragile calm. The warm glow of his desk lamp cut through shadows, illuminating scattered notes and the well-worn path of his thoughts. Outside, the rain softened further, a gentle patter against the windows, as if the world itself held its breath. Finch sat once more, the quiet signal folded between pages, and waited for the dawn. The narrow corridor leading to the APRO office smelled faintly of damp cardboard and stale air, a scent that seemed to have settled like dust over decades. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a muted glow on peeling paint and scuffed concrete floors. Dr. Finch moved deliberately, the heels of his leather shoes clicking with measured cadence, each step a metronome marking the quiet passage into a hidden fragment of the world. A brass plaque beside the door bore the agency's name, now yellowed and curling at the edges, APRO etched in faded black letters that had long ceased to shine. Inside, the office unfolded as a cramped warren of 3 small rooms, cramped and cluttered, imbued with the mustiness of neglected archives. The walls were lined with shelves sagging under the weight of ancient files, their tongues of paper yellowed and brittle. Boxes stamped with fading government insignias sat haphazardly atop one another, as if waiting patiently for a resurrection that never came. A tangled web of cables snaked across the threadbare carpet, connecting ancient computers and humming electronics, whose purpose seemed as elusive as the secrets stored here. At the far end, a young woman stood behind a desk cluttered with notebooks, loose sheets, and 2 half-empty mugs of cooling tea. She wore a grey cardigan over a blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face keen with quiet intelligence. As Finch entered, she looked up, eyes sharp but unassuming, the faintest crease of curiosity breaking through her composed expression. "Dr. Finch," she said, voice smooth and pragmatic, "I'm Eleanor Vance. The MOD assigned me as your analyst and liaison. Welcome to APRO." Her hand extended briefly, firm but not overly so, grounding the moment without ceremony. Finch nodded, removing his worn corduroy jacket and draping it over the back of a creaking wooden chair. The fabric, soft and threadbare, carried the faint scent of tobacco and old books, a small comfort in this claustrophobic space. He smiled faintly, a dry twist of lips. "Thank you. I'm glad to meet you, Miss Vance. I expect we'll need all the clarity we can muster." Eleanor tapped a pen lightly on her notebook, a rhythmic sound that seemed to punctuate the room's stillness. "I've been briefed on your arrival. Sir Malcolm's instructions were clear. Total discretion, full cooperation. We're to assist you in any way." She gestured toward a battered filing cabinet. "This is where the bulk of our files are stored. We'll start there." Finch moved toward the cabinet, fingers trailing over the dents and chips in the enamel. Each drawer creaked open, revealing rows of manila folders stamped with dates and cryptic titles. The weight of history lay in these brittle pages, a silent testimony to decades of observation, dismissal, and erasure. He pulled a box from the bottom shelf, its cardboard edges frayed, and set it on a rickety table beneath a flickering light. Settling into a cracked leather chair, Finch lifted the lid and peered inside. The contents smelled of must and dust, a faint undertone of mildew hinting at long hours spent in damp storerooms. The top file was marked 1970 to 1975, miscellaneous reports, closed cases. He opened it carefully, revealing yellowed sheets typed in monochrome, their margins annotated in ink that had faded to a ghostly blue. The first report described a series of sightings over a rural village in Norfolk, dismissed as meteorological phenomena or atmospheric illusions. The language was polite but dismissive, a subtle tone of condescension wrapped in bureaucratic finality. Finch traced the words with a finger, absorbing the pattern of skepticism that threaded through each account. He dipped into the next folder, dated 1982, which chronicled another cluster of incidents near a coastal town. Again, the explanations leaned heavily on natural phenomena, misidentified aircraft, and mass hallucination. The reports carried an air of frustration, suggesting the analysts were trapped between genuine curiosity and political necessity. Hours slipped by as Finch sifted through the archival sediment, the room growing colder as daylight dimmed outside. The rain tapped against the grimy window panes, a steady percussion that filled the quiet like a heartbeat. Eleanor remained nearby, occasionally glancing at her notebook or browsing a digital terminal, the pale glow reflecting in her thoughtful eyes. Towards the bottom of the box, Finch's hand hesitated, lingering over a folder marked 1986, Cotswolds Incident. He pulled it free with a slow exhale and unfolded the contents with care. Photographs slipped from within. Grainy images of a misty field beneath a gunmetal sky. A solitary figure bathed in diffuse light, halos faint and wavering. The accompanying report recounted the local police's hurried investigation, which concluded with an absurd official explanation involving malfunctioning electrical equipment and mass hysteria. Finch's gaze lifted to the window, where the rain blurred the cityscape into soft strokes of grey and silver. He felt the stirrings of a memory, faint but persistent, a distant echo from a summer evening decades past. The quiet weight of the photograph pressed against his chest, a tether to that lost fragment of innocence and wonder. Behind him, Eleanor's voice broke the silence, steady and low. The official story never sat well with me. Too many gaps, too many contradictions. But going deeper has always been discouraged. She tapped her pen twice against the notebook. You're here to change that. Finch turned, meeting her gaze. There was a pragmatism there, but also a flicker of something more, curiosity tempered by caution. He inclined his head. Then we have work to do. This quiet signal, it's not something to be brushed aside lightly. She nodded, rising to clear a stack of papers from the desk, revealing a map dotted with pins and hand-drawn lines. The data patterns suggest these events aren't random. They cluster along fault lines and power grids, but no one has pieced it together comprehensively. Yet. He moved closer, studying the spread of points like a constellation of secrets waiting to be deciphered. The room seemed to contract around them, the hum of forgotten machines and the scent of old paper forming a cocoon of focus. Let's begin with the historical records. We need to understand what's been seen, what's been hidden, and what remains unexplained. His voice was measured, the weight of responsibility settling lightly but firmly on his shoulders. Outside, the rain softened, becoming a whisper against the glass. Finch stood at the window, the city's lights shimmering through the mist like distant stars. He was here for a reason, drawn by threads woven long before him, threads braided from fear, silence, and the faint, persistent signal that refused to be ignored. Eleanor joined him, her eyes reflecting the muted glow. It's not just about the phenomena, it's about what we do with the truth, she said quietly. He nodded, fingers tightening around the edge of the windowsill. And about what the world is ready to accept. The silence stretched between them, calm and contemplative, as the quiet signal pulsed faintly in the spaces between. The night deepened, and the first pieces of a complex puzzle began to take shape in the stillness of the old office. Finch settled at the desk once more, ready to bring the past into the light, one fragile page at a time. The air in the APRO office was thick, the mustiness of old paper mingling with the faint metallic tinge of aging electronics. Finch rubbed the bridge of his nose, his fingers brushing over the rough texture of his corduroy jacket sleeve as he squinted at the faded text before him. Eleanor sat across the battered metal desk, a steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands, the subtle clink of her pen tapping rhythmically against a leather-bound notebook, the only other sound between them. You'll find the files here are mostly variants of the same story, she said, voice measured. Officially, incidents are almost always explained away as atmospheric phenomena, mass hysteria, or equipment malfunction. The language is consistent. Finch nodded slowly, scanning a report from 1978. The words echoed with a sterile certainty, dismissive yet careful. No verifiable evidence, perceptual error by witnesses, atmospheric optical illusion. He underlined a phrase with deliberate precision, his mind already tracing the implications. If these assessments are identical across decades, it suggests a pattern of dismissal that is less about the incidents themselves, more about the narrative they want to control. Eleanor's eyes narrowed just slightly. You're not the first to notice, but observing the pattern is one thing, proving coordination is another. Finch allowed a faint smile, the dry wit flickering to life despite the weight in the room. I suspect the coordination is bureaucratic, not conspiratorial. A defensive reflex embedded in the system. Her pen paused, then resumed tapping. Defensive, yes. Institutional self-preservation. They can't acknowledge what they don't want the public or themselves to confront. The dim light flickered momentarily, casting elongated shadows across the cluttered desks and filing cabinets. Finch leaned back, letting the silence settle around them like a soft shroud. Then our work is to unravel that reflex, to find the moments when it falters. Eleanor's gaze shifted from the documents to his face, her expression unreadable yet attentive, and to know when to push and when to hold back. They moved in tandem toward a large wall map, its surface aged and discolored, dotted with small pins and notes in faded ink. Eleanor gestured at the tapestry of incidents marked in clusters. Notice these alignments, fault lines and power grids. It's not random. Finch traced the lines with a fingertip, the rough paper pressing cool beneath his touch. Geomagnetic anomalies, he spoke softly, as if voicing a secret. These aren't just random sightings, they're tied to the Earth itself. And perhaps to something beneath it, Eleanor added, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Something older than any of us. The quiet between them deepened, the outside world fading beneath the hum of the ancient fluorescent bulbs. Finch's eyes returned to the folder marked 1986 Cotswolds Incident. Grainy black and white photographs showed indistinct shapes hovering above a field. The official reports labeled it a hoax or misinterpretation, but the images spoke to his buried memory. A flicker of a childhood night, the cold grass beneath him, the silent shapes. I remember this, he murmured, voice low. Not from documents, but from that night. A tremor of something unspoken lingered in the air. Eleanor's posture stiffened imperceptibly, as if weighing the import of his admission. Then you know why this matter is personal, she said quietly. Why it's hard to let go? Finch folded the photographs carefully, stacking them alongside the notes Eleanor had prepared. We catalogue these meticulously. Every dismissed report, every unexplained anomaly. We need to see the whole picture, not just the fragments. She nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. I'll pull the files from the Ashdown archives next week. They have material that never made it here. Some of it classified beyond our clearance, but I can get you access. The words carried promise and caution in equal measure. Finch appreciated the delicate balance, her guarded trust, his patient insistence. Together they were a fragile alliance against the quiet weight of decades. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the clock. It's late. We should rest before tomorrow's dive into the Rendlesham files. Finch rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Yes. Tomorrow, we chase shadows in the forest. She refilled his mug with tea, the steam rising in lazy spirals. And what we find may change everything. As the night settled beyond the grimy windows, Finch lingered a moment longer, the scent of old paper and warm tea grounding him. The quiet signal was faint, but it pulsed beneath the surface, waiting for them to listen. The first light of morning slid through the narrow window, casting long, thin shadows across the crowded APRO office. The scent of dust and faint ozone lingered in the stale air, punctuated by the low hum of an ancient radiator that coughed intermittently. Finch sat behind the battered desk, the wood worn soft under his palms, the same corduroy jacket he'd worn for years draped over the back of his chair. He tapped a pen lightly against a pad of yellowed paper, eyes fixed on the screen before him, where a list of incident reports blinked quietly. The weight of uncounted dismissals pressed against him like a cold stone. With deliberate calm, he began drafting the formal request. Not just summaries or second-hand accounts, but the original investigation files, the unfiltered documents, the raw observations, the unredacted transcripts. His fingers hovered briefly before the keys, the hum of the office settling into a rhythm around him. He knew the significance of such a request. These files were guarded like relics, shrouded in bureaucratic reticence, but if their pattern was to be unraveled, the full truth had to be faced, unvarnished. He clicked send, the message routed through official channels, straight to the desk of Sir Malcolm Sterling. Finch leaned back, the chair creaking beneath a sudden weight of anticipation. He looked toward Eleanor across the cramped room. She sat cross-legged on the edge of a battered filing cabinet, the scrape of her pen against notebook paper soft but steady. The faint scent of her tea mingled with the mustiness of old paper and warm electronics. Her brows furrowed as she caught his eye, a cautious question lingering in her gaze. Hours crawled by. Finch paced slowly between the cluttered desks, the familiar rhythm of his shoes against the scuffed floorboards grounding him. Outside, the city began to stir, distant traffic, the scraping of tires against rain-slicked stone. The office windows steamed slightly with the rise of morning warmth. Then the reply came, terse and immovable. Request denied. The official reason was standard: national security concerns. The subtext, however, was unmistakable. Finch's stomach tightened with a dull ache that threatened to settle in his chest. Unwilling to yield, he approached the matter from another angle. There was a quieter, less conspicuous administrative route, one less obvious but potentially more accommodating. He drafted a second request, less direct yet no less determined, addressing it to a lesser-known archival office within MOD. The tone was measured, professional, almost pleading. He relied on Eleanor's keen insight for the phrasing, her fingers resting lightly on the keys as she whispered suggestions with a steady breath. Once sent, they waited together, the silence thick and expectant. The denial arrived swift and absolute. Finch read the curt reply aloud, voice low and even. Confidentiality protocols remain in force. No files available for release. The finality stung. It was clear now they were being watched, not merely by passive oversight, but with active eyes tracing their every move. The knowledge settled uneasily between them, a quiet intrusion that deepened the shadows inside the small office. Eleanor shifted, folding her arms and tapping her pen against her notebook with a rhythm that betrayed her own unease. "You don't think they'd go this far without reason?" she said carefully, eyes tracing the spines of heavy binders stacked nearby. "There's something beneath all this, Finch. Whatever it is, it's not something they want us poking at." Finch nodded slowly, fingers entwined. The pattern's too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. These dismissals, the selective secrecy, it's a defensive narrative, a shield against something that terrifies them. He paused, voice dropping to a near whisper. But what? And why keep it hidden for so long? Their conversation unfolded with measured care, a dance of probing questions and cautious reflections. Eleanor hesitated, then asked, "What drew you in really, beyond the science, beyond the reports?" Finch's gaze drifted to the faded photographs pinned to the wall, the grainy images of the 1986 Cotswold sighting. "A memory," he confessed, "a fragment from childhood I buried long ago. Seeing those photos pulled it to the surface. It's personal, and it's why I can't just walk away." Eleanor's expression softened behind her glasses, the tapping of her pen slowing. "I understand that. Sometimes the truth isn't just academic, it's deeply intimate, but you have to be careful. This isn't just about facts and figures. There are real lives, real consequences." He studied her closely, the shadows beneath her eyes, the subtle strength in her posture. "You're not just a data analyst, are you?" She met his gaze steadily, a faint smile touching her lips. "No," she admitted. "I'm something more, but so are you, Finch. That's why we're here, to find what's been kept quiet for too long." The quiet resolution between them was the fragile light in the dim office. Outside, the rain began again, soft, pattering against the window panes, mingling with the distant hum of the waking city. Finch returned to his desk, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across his face. The files remained out of reach, but the signal beneath the noise grew clearer. They would listen, they would wait, and when the time came, they would speak. The truth, however long buried, was waiting to be heard. The soft scratch of Finch's pen against the yellowed notepad broke the heavy quiet of the cramped office. Outside, the persistent drizzle tapped rhythmically on the narrow window pane, its muted patter a steady counterpoint to the methodical scribbling. Eleanor sat across the battered metal desk, the dim light catching the glint of her pen as she tapped it absently against her notebook. Her eyes remained fixed on Finch, attentive and still, a silent invitation to continue. Finch lifted his gaze to meet hers, the weight of days spent poring over files and reports, settling deeper into his features. "The dismissals," he began, voice low and deliberate. "They're too uniform, too consistent." He paused, fingers interlaced atop the open folder that lay between them. "Every time there's a sighting or an incident worth noting, the next step always seems to be to push it out of the formal record. Dismiss, discredit, or quietly reassign the officer involved." His gaze drifted to the rain sliding down the glass, smearing the world beyond into a watercolor of greys and muted greens. Eleanor's pen finally stilled. She folded her hands in her lap, shoulders squared but relaxed. "You think it's systematic?" she said, voice measured, "not just random bureaucratic inertia or incompetence." Her brow furrowed slightly, the faintest crease between her eyes. The room smelled faintly of stale paper and the lingering trace of her chamomile tea. "If the pattern is intentional, it implies coordination at a level higher than we've been able to access so far." Finch nodded, a dry smile tugging briefly at his lips, barely disturbing the steady calm he wore like his warm corduroy jacket. "Exactly, and the coordination might be why our requests get bounced back, or better yet, ignored." He tapped the folder again. "I'm starting to map the dates, the locations. It's not random. These dismissals cluster around certain geographical points, often near military installations or areas of strategic interest." His eyes found Eleanor's again. "Ashworth, for example?" The rain suffused the room with a cold dampness that seeped into the faded carpet and the rough-edged wood of the desk. Eleanor shifted, the chair creaking softly beneath her, as she folded open a page in her own notebook. "And the witness reports? Are they equally consistent?" She sounded curious but cautious, as if weighing whether she trusted the patterns he was drawing. Finch leaned back against the peeling plaster wall, hands in his pockets, eyes momentarily closing to the dim grey overhead light. "They vary, but there's a common thread," he said after a moment. "Descriptions of shape, movement, silence. The majority mention a dark form, no wings, no lights, no sound, just a presence." He exhaled slowly, the faint scent of his own cologne mingling with the room's mustiness. "That's what I saw in '86 in the Cotswolds, that same silent dark shape, and now I'm finding others who've seen it too." A subtle tension tightened Eleanor's lips. She tapped her pen twice against the corner of her notebook, eyes flickering with the unspoken possibilities. "Have you cross-referenced any of those witnesses? Checked for overlaps in their backgrounds or locations?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost conspiratorial. "I'm working on that." Finch's fingers traced absent arcs across the surface of the folder. "There's one case in particular I want to revisit. The witness was a farmer near Rendlesham Forest, 1964. His description matches mine exactly. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Now, I'm not so sure." His gaze sharpened, the tired lines of his face deepening as the familiar glow of obsession took hold. The office door creaked open just slightly, admitting the faint scent of cold rain and the distant murmur of traffic. Eleanor glanced up, then back at Finch, as if to remind him the world outside was still moving, still indifferent to their quiet pursuit. Finch folded the folder closed, the paper making a soft rustle. "Let's dig deeper tomorrow," he said. "I have a feeling this thread leads somewhere." Later that evening, the office was nearly empty save for Finch. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows over stacks of yellowing documents and obsolete computer monitors. The steady hum of the aging ventilation system mingled with the occasional distant clang from the building's bowels. Finch sat alone at his desk, the worn leather surface cold beneath his palms. A small desk lamp cast a warm circle of light onto the open file before him. He leaned closer, eyes scanning the faded typewritten pages. The witness statement lay there, fragile as a leaf, describing in precise, trembling detail the shape he had half remembered from childhood dreams. The words silent, dark, motionless above the field echoed faintly in his mind. His fingers traced the lines lingering over the name. Thomas Avery, a farmer who had vanished from public memory decades ago. Finch's breath caught slightly as a faint scent of damp earth seemed to seep from the pages. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming steadily against the window's thin glass. The smell of wet stone and moss filled the night air beyond the office's confines, mingling with the distant, mournful call of a night bird. Finch sat very still, the weight of years and secrets pressing around him like the cold night air. The silence was almost complete, broken only by the soft turning of a page and the occasional sigh of the building settling. He closed his eyes briefly, the memories surfacing unbidden, the summer of '86, the Cotswolds fields still and glowing under a low sun, the shape hovering just beyond perception, the absence of sound, the absence of fear, only a quiet, profound certainty that something else was there, watching. He opened his eyes again, the file still spread before him like a fragile bridge across time. Finch reached slowly for a chipped ceramic mug, the faint trace of cold tea lingering in its depths. The act felt oddly grounding. The scent of brewed leaves rose, mingling with the paper's mustiness and the faint electrical tang of the aged office equipment. He sipped the warmth, spreading through his chest, a small anchor amid the swelling tide of memories and unanswered questions. He thought of Eleanor, of her quiet pragmatism and sharp mind, her fingers tapping pens and stirring tea like a ritual against uncertainty. He thought of the files yet unopened, the hidden corridors of government walls, the shadows beyond official statements, and he thought of the shape, silent, dark, waiting. The night deepened outside, the rain softening to a gentle drizzle. The office windows fogged with the breath of the world inside, blurring the sharp outlines of street lamps and wet pavement. Finch sat back, hands folded, the file resting lightly on the desk before him. Somewhere beyond, distant and faint, a clock chimed the hour. He did not move for a long time, allowing the quiet to settle around him like a shroud. Then, slowly, he reached for his notebook, pen poised, as if preparing to write not just observations but a covenant, to listen, to wait, to follow the quiet signal wherever it might lead. Outside, the rain whispered secrets on the stone and glass. Inside, the night held its breath. The office grew colder as the night deepened. The rain's steady percussion against the window pane, a muted rhythm beneath the dim glow of a single desk lamp. Finch sat hunched over his cluttered workspace, the yellowed pages of witness statements spread before him like fragile autumn leaves. The faint aroma of chamomile mingled with the musty scent of old paper and the faint tang of metal from his ever-present watch. Outside, the city's distant hum was barely perceptible, swallowed by the pattering rain and the occasional flicker of streetlights casting elongated shadows across the cracked plaster walls. Or his fingers paused over one particularly faded document, a report from a farmer named Thomas Avery, dated 1964, describing a sighting not unlike Finch's own childhood encounter. The words were sparse but vivid. A dark shape, no wings, gliding silently over the trees, Avery had written, the ink slightly smudged, as though hurried or trembling. Finch's mind traced the image, the sensation of being watched settling once again behind his eyes. He closed the file carefully, the paper whispering in protest. Something was stirring beneath the surface of these decades-old accounts, a pattern threading through time like a slow, deep current. A soft chime cut through the silence. Finch looked up sharply, the suddenness breaking the reverie. His computer screen blinked with a new message, flagged red. The subject line read, Preliminary Incident Report. R.A.F. Ashworth. Unexplained anomaly. His breath slowed as he clicked it open, the text revealing an unsettling sequence. During a night training exercise over the North Sea, radar operators at Ashworth had tracked an unidentified object exhibiting erratic movements, coupled with an unmistakable visual sighting by two pilots. The report was terse, clinical, but with an undercurrent of unease that prickled the back of Finch's neck. Eleanor's name appeared at the top of the email's copy list. Without hesitation, Finch reached for his phone and dialed her number. The soft beep of connection punctuated by the steady rain. The line crackled before her voice came through, calm, professional, yet carrying the faintest trace of curiosity. Finch, it's late. I just received a report from Ashworth, Finch said quietly, his voice steady despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. Radar anomaly, visual confirmation, it's happening now. There was a brief pause. Eleanor's pen began tapping softly against her notebook, a nervous habit Finch had come to recognize. Send it to me right away. I want to cross-reference their coordinates with known power lines and fault intersections. If this matches our pattern, it could be significant. Finch nodded to himself, even though she couldn't see him. I'll forward the full preliminary data and the radar logs once I get them. The thought of accessing raw radar tapes sent a ripple of anticipation through him. This was no longer theory or history. It was unfolding in real time. High above the cold expanse of the North Sea, Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed gripped the controls of his Hawk jet with a practiced ease born from years of familiarity. The cockpit was a sanctuary of muted instrument lights and the soft hum of engines, insulated from the dark weight of the storm clouds gathering below. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint saltiness of the sea and the distant echo of waves crashing against unseen shores. Reed's eyes were fixed upward, tracing the infinite canvas of a star-studded sky. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, a pale, ghostly river of light against the velvet black. His breath came steady, measured, a quiet meditation in motion. Flying, he had always said, was like holding a fragile conversation with the wind itself. Tonight, that conversation felt charged, as if the darkness held its own secret, waiting just beyond the glow of the instrument panel. Beside him, his wingmen maintained formation effortlessly. The synchronized rhythm of their flight was a dance perfected over countless sorties. The safety and precision of their routine contrasted sharply with the undercurrent of unease Reed sensed, an echo of stories old and new whispered in the corridors of Ashworth. He pushed aside the feeling, focusing instead on the silent sweep of radar scopes and the steady pulse of navigational aids. Back in London, Finch's fingers flew across the keyboard, forwarding the Ashworth report to Eleanor, attaching scanned images of the preliminary radar data. The office felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of unfolding events. He stood and began to pace, the familiar scrape of his corduroy jacket whispering against the worn wooden floorboards. His mind raced through possibilities, false readings, atmospheric interference, or something far more elusive. A sudden movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting in the corner where the office light fell off into darkness. For a moment, he thought he saw the outline of a wingless shape, black and silent, just beyond his reach. A trick of the light surely, but the sensation lingered like a faint pulse beneath his skin. At RAF Ashworth's operations room, the radar console flickered steadily, the operators' faces illuminated by dials and screens that barely masked their tension. Flight Lieutenant Reed's voice crackled over the radio, calm but taut. "Control, this is Hawk 3. We're picking up something on the northern perimeter. No transponder signal. Movements don't match any known flight plan." The controller's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before responding. "Copy, Hawk 3. Radar track is intermittent, but it's moving erratically. No flight plan filed for that zone tonight." Reed's eyes never left the dark horizon beyond the runway lights. Visual contact bearing northeast. Shape is, I don't know. It's dark. No wings, no lights. Silent. The controller swallowed hard, the stillness in the room thickening. "Maintain formation, Hawk 3. Do not engage." In the cramped APRO office, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze flickering between the radar data and the geospatial maps pinned to the walls. A pattern was beginning to emerge, clusters of sightings and dismissals tightly linked to intersections of power grids and geological fault lines. The Ashworth incident seemed to fit perfectly, a new point on an invisible web stretched across the country. She untied her ponytail, the motion slow and deliberate, releasing a cascade of dark hair that caught the lamplight. Her fingers tapped against her notebook, a staccato rhythm that matched the pulse in her temples. "If this is real, Finch," she said softly, "then we're looking at something that's been watching us for decades, or centuries." Finch appeared at the doorframe, the faint dampness of rain clinging to his jacket. Or longer. Flight Lieutenant Reed's jet sliced through the night air, the ocean below a shifting mosaic of black and silver under the moonlight. The cold seeped through the cockpit's insulation, sharp and biting, but the pilot felt only the steady warmth of focus. The unknown object remained just on the edge of detection, a spectre blending into the shadows of radar echoes and distant stars. He recalled a conversation from earlier that day with an old radar operator who had hinted at stories no one dared speak aloud. Reed had laughed it off then, but now the words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the skies hold secrets older than any of us. Reed adjusted his helmet's visor, the soft click punctuating the silence. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for a truth hidden beneath layers of official silence. Back in London, Finch poured himself a fresh cup of chamomile tea, the steam curling upward in gentle spirals. The herbal scent was a small comfort amidst the relentless tide of information. He settled into his chair, the worn leather creaking softly, and stared at the screen, the Ashworth data glowing faintly. Somewhere beneath the layers of radar blips and pilot accounts, the quiet signal pulsed, steady, insistent. He allowed himself a moment of reflection, remembering the field in the Cotswolds, the dark shape hovering silently overhead, the certainty of being seen and unseen at once. It was a memory etched deep in his bones, an anchor pulling him toward a truth that refused to be silenced. In the operations room at Ashworth, the radar operators exchanged uneasy glances. The anomaly was no longer behaving like any known aircraft or weather pattern. The echoes on the screen were irregular, sometimes fading completely before reappearing miles away. One operator whispered, almost to himself, "It's like it's watching us." Outside, the wind howled softly, carrying the distant cry of seabirds lost to the night. The base sat isolated against the vast sea and sky, a sentinel on the edge of the unknown. Eleanor's pen paused as she studied the overlapping maps, lines converging with uncanny precision. The intersections mirrored the points of previous sightings, each cluster a silent note in a symphony of secrets. She tapped the pen twice against the page, then wrote a single word. Pattern. She closed her notebook gently, the quiet finality of the action settling over her. "We need to see the raw radar data," she said to Finch when he returned. "If there's something out there, it's telling us something." Finch nodded, the familiar rhythm of their partnership steady despite the turbulence of the night. "I'll make the call." The night deepened at RAF Ashworth. Reed's jet banked silently over the dark water, the cockpit dimly lit against the vastness beyond. The anomaly appeared again, a fleeting shadow against the starlit sea. Reed's breath was steady, his senses sharpened in the quiet tension. The sky was a vast, unknowable place, and tonight it seemed to whisper of things not meant to be understood. In the humid quiet of the APRO office, the weight of decades pressed heavily upon Finch. As he reviewed the correspondence between military officials, the language was careful, coded, a dance of omission and implication. The government's hand was clear in the deliberate silencing of witnesses, the erasure of truth beneath layers of bureaucratic shadow. He sipped his tea, the warmth a thin shield against the cold calculus of secrecy. Somewhere out there, beyond radar and reason, the quiet signal waited. At Ashworth, Reed's radio crackled again, the voice of his wingman steady but tense. "You seeing this? It's moving against the wind like it knows where we are." Reed's jaw tightened. "I see it. Keep your eyes sharp. Don't lose it." The jet slowed, adjusting formation as the anomaly shifted unpredictably. The night air was thick with unspoken questions. Eleanor's fingers traced the lines on the map once more, her mind weaving connections through the labyrinth of data. She spoke softly, the words more to herself than anyone else. "This isn't just surveillance, it's communication, or a warning." Finch leaned in, the shadows under his eyes deepening. And it's been happening for longer than we imagined. The rain had slackened outside, the clouds parting to reveal a silver wash of moonlight over London's rooftops. Finch paused by the window, the cool glass damp beneath his fingertips. In the distance, the city's heartbeat pulsed faintly, a fragile contrast to the vast silence stretching beyond. He thought of Ashworth, of Reed and his wingman, navigating the dark between stars and sea. The quiet signal was alive tonight. In the cockpit, Reed's gaze flicked to the instruments, then back to the shadow hovering just beyond the edge of radar. It was no conventional aircraft. It moved with a purpose that defied explanation, draped in the darkness of the sea and sky. The pilot's fingers curled tightly around the controls, steady despite the cold prickle of unease. He had seen many things in his career, but nothing like this. Back in the office, Finch settled again at his desk, the tea now cold but forgotten. He began drafting a message, a careful request for access to the full radar archives at Ashworth. The words felt heavy, measured, each sentence a step further into the unknown. He paused, staring at the blinking cursor as if it might offer an answer. Instead, it waited silently, a quiet signal of its own. The night sky above Ashworth was vast and unyielding, the stars distant fires in an endless black ocean. Reed's jet glided through the cold air, the anomaly still just beyond reach, always there, a dark heartbeat against the fabric of the night. The flight continued, the silence between radio calls filled with questions that no one yet dared to voice aloud. Finch finally leaned back, the weight of the night settling around him like a familiar cloak. The quiet signal was no longer a whisper from the past. It was a presence, alive and watching. The mysteries, threaded through the years, converging now in this moment. A fragile fulcrum, poised to tip. He closed his eyes briefly, the distant roll of thunder a low, steady drum. Tomorrow would bring more answers, or more questions. For now, there was only the night, and the silent shape moving just beyond the edge of understanding. The cockpit was cool, the faint hum of engines a steady pulse beneath Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed's measured breathing. Above, the sky stretched vast and ashen, the moon veiled behind thin clouds that blurred its silver glow. The jet sliced through the damp autumn air, the sea below a black mirror reflecting only the distant pinpricks of coastal lights. Reed's eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the horizon where radar had hinted at something unusual. Beside him, his wingman's craft mirrored every subtle movement, a silent shadow in their shared patrol. A sudden flicker caught Reed's peripheral vision, a shadow detached from the moon's faint glow, moving with unsettling purpose against the currents of the air. He adjusted his instruments, the glow of dials casting a pale light on the worn leather of his gloves. The triangular shape emerged, dark and precise, its silent descent defying every rule engraved in his training. From 20,000 feet it plummeted in moments to 500, not with the roar or turbulence expected, but with eerie grace, as if obeying a geometry beyond human comprehension. Reed's heart, trained to remain steady in the chaos of combat, tightened. The object hovered then, motionless against the mottled sky, its edges sharp and unyielding. No lights, no heat signature, just an absence of sound that screamed louder than any engine. The jet's instruments flickered, a low, static whisper crawling through the radio channels. Reed reached for the microphone, voice calm but edged with disbelief. "Base, this is Falcon 2. Do you read? We have contact, bearing 060, range 5 miles. Confirm visual?" Static answered him, thick and confused. "Falcon 2, we have no contacts. Repeat, no contacts on radar. You're advised to maintain formation." The silence that followed was heavier, Then the jet's roar, a void filled with the unspoken. Reed's wingman mirrored his gaze, eyes wide behind the dark visor. The triangular form pulsed once, a subtle glow washing over its hull, casting a faint, unnatural light onto the clouds below. It was as if the object was breathing, alive in a way that defied everything Reed understood about the machines of man. Their jets circled slowly, engines whispering against the chilled air. The object remained still. Then, with a suddenness that seemed impossible, it shot upwards vertically. There was no acceleration roar, no sonic boom, just an instant disappearance into the blank slate of night. The space where it had hovered was empty, cold, and untouched by any trace. Reed's radio crackled again, voices now tinged with disbelief and urgency. Falcon 2 report. All stations confirm no visual. Recommend immediate return. The two pilots exchanged a glance, the mute acknowledgement of the impossible hanging between them. Their crafts banked, tracing a reluctant path back to Ashworth, engines humming a low dirge. The dark sea below whispered secrets, the wind cold on their faces as the shoreline's lights grew nearer. In the quiet moments before landing, Reed's mind raced, senses sharpened and yet overwhelmed. The weight of what they had seen pressed against his ribs, a silent truth that settled deep in the marrow. His grip tightened on the controls, knuckles pale beneath worn gloves. Beside him, the wingman's jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the empty sky, both men anchored in the certainty that this was no mere hallucination or technical glitch. The runway lights cut through the night, guiding the jets to the tarmac slick with early frost. The engine's roar softened, replaced by the hush of wheels kissing concrete. As they taxied to a stop, the stillness enveloped them once more, an aftershock of the encounter. The hangar loomed ahead, its shadows long and inscrutable. Reed unclipped his harness slowly, the metal clicks echoing softly in the cockpit. He exhaled, a breath carried away by the chill air, then turned to meet his wingman's eyes. Neither spoke, words felt hollow beside the vast, unyielding silence of the sky. Yet in that unspoken exchange lay a fracture between what was known and what had been glimpsed, an anomaly that refused to be explained. Outside, the wind tugged at the uniform jackets, carrying the salt tang of the sea and the promise of rain. The base was alive with the low murmur of voices, footsteps on concrete, the distant clang of maintenance. But for Reed and his companion, the world had shifted imperceptibly. The night stretched thin between what was seen and what was denied. They moved toward the briefing room, the air inside warm but heavy with anticipation. The hum of old fluorescent lights mingled with the faint scent of brewing coffee and cold metal. Radar tapes lay scattered on a table, static-filled screens flickering with ghostly echoes. They gathered around, the glow illuminating faces etched with disbelief and curiosity. Reed's hands trembled slightly as he pointed to the recorded blips, the triangular shape traced in erratic pulses. The technicians exchanged unsure glances, their expertise clashing with the inexplicability of the data. Questions hung in the air, unanswered and daunting. Was it a new aircraft, a trick of the technology, or something else entirely? Outside, the wind shifted. The distant thrum of the sea matched the pulse of Reed's own heartbeat, steady but insistent. The night held its breath, the sky vast and mute, hiding secrets older than the stones beneath their feet. Reed knew this was only the beginning. The quiet signal had been heard, and the world was poised on the edge of revelation. The room emptied slowly, voices reduced to murmurs, and the rustle of papers. Reed lingered, gazing through the rain-speckled window toward the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond radar and reason, the anomaly awaited, and he, bound by duty and haunted by memory, was drawn irrevocably into its shadow. The chill of the night crept in through the cracks, wrapping around the base like a whispered warning. Reed's breath fogged the glass as he stared upward, feeling the weight of the unknown settle deep. The triangular shape was no longer just a shape, it was a question, a presence, a quiet signal calling out from the depths of sky and sea, from the hidden veins of the earth itself. As the first hints of dawn touched the clouds, Reed finally turned away, the soft click of his boots on concrete a solitary echo. The flight was over, but the flight into understanding had only just begun. The briefing room at Ashworth was a narrow, utilitarian space, lit by the faint, flickering glow of fluorescent tubes overhead. The walls, once a pristine off-white, bore the faint stains of decades of cigarette smoke and damp. Reed sat stiffly at the long metal table, the scratches and dents beneath his palms a subtle reminder of the countless hours spent here, planning sorties, reviewing engagements, delivering orders. Tonight, however, it felt hollow. The hum of the overhead lights mingled with a distant muttering from the corridor, where two men in dark suits had just arrived, their polished shoes clicking sharply on the concrete floor. The younger of the two men stood first to address the room, his voice measured but edged with a clinical detachment. Flight Lieutenant Reed, your report has been reviewed alongside radar logs and communications transcripts. The official record, as it stands, reflects no unusual aerial activity at the time of your sortie. His gaze was calm, unwavering, like a surgeon examining a specimen. Can you account for any sensory or instrument malfunction during your flight? Reed's fingers tightened against the cold metal tabletop. The question was a scalpel, dissecting his experience down to its bare bones, seeking a flaw to explain away what no one wanted to acknowledge. All instruments were operational, Reed replied evenly, though his throat felt tight, his voice quieter than intended. No malfunctions reported by either myself or my wingman. The object was visible, no lights, no heat signature, silent. We lost radio contact briefly, but that coincided exactly with the presence of the object. The older man, with a silver streak in his hair, exchanged a subtle glance with his colleague before stepping forward. Visual perception can be unreliable under night conditions, especially at high speeds and altitudes. Atmospheric phenomena, optical illusions, even fatigue can influence such accounts. He spoke slowly, laying out the expected narrative with the precision of a lawyer. We must consider all possibilities before revising official records. Reed's jaw clenched. He had trained for years to defend against enemy craft, to rely on precise instrumentation and rigorous procedure. This was no illusion. He met the man's eyes steadily. Sir, with respect, I have flown in adverse conditions and faced hostile engagements. This was neither a weather anomaly nor misidentification. The object's movement defied all known aerodynamics. It descended silently, stopped mid-air, then accelerated vertically beyond any known capability. The room fell quiet except for the low drone of the ventilation system. The two men exchanged another glance, inscrutable, before the younger one tapped a folder resting on the table. We have reviewed radar tapes from multiple stations. The data is inconclusive. Any blips matching your description were faint and erratic, likely interference or equipment anomalies. For official purposes, the incident is logged as a false alarm. He slid a document across to Reed, the typed words stark and final. Reed stared at the paper, the sterile font spelling out a sanitized version of events that erased the uncomfortable truth. His hands trembled slightly as he tore the document into neat pieces, folding them with precise anger. This isn't right, he said softly, the weight of frustration pressing down on him like the cold night air outside. I'm grounded, pending further review. The older man cleared his throat, voice softening but firm. Grounding is a precautionary measure. You will receive reassignment orders imminently. The ministry has decided to transfer you to a specialized division in London. Your skills may be better suited to analytical work. His gaze lingered on Reed, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Reed's mind raced, the cold fire of indignation mingling with an odd flicker of curiosity. What division? He asked, voice low. APRO, the younger man answered. The Air Phenomena Research Organization. The name hung in the air like an unfamiliar shadow. Reed had heard whispers, vague references to a secretive unit dealing with unexplained aerial events, but nothing concrete. It was neither a promotion nor a demotion, something else entirely. When do I report? Immediately, the older man said, handing over a file containing the details. Transportation will be arranged. After the men departed, the room seemed emptier, the walls closing in with the silence of things left unsaid. Reed stared out of the small window, the pale wash of dawn beginning to soften the horizon. The sea beyond the cliffs was a slate expanse, cold and indifferent. The night's encounter lingered in his mind, a silent spectral presence defying explanation. His wingman approached quietly, eyes dark with shared disbelief. Grounded, he murmured. Same for me, I heard. Reed nodded, voice rough. They don't want us talking or thinking too hard. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of salt and wet stone through the airbase. The cold seeped into the bones like a quiet accusation. Reed pulled his jacket tighter, the worn fabric comforting in its familiar weight. The object's silence echoed still, a quiet signal marking the edge of known reality. Later, alone in his quarters, Reed sat at the narrow desk beneath a cracked window, the early morning light filtering through threadbare curtains. He opened the envelope containing his reassignment orders again, fingers tracing the embossed edges. The letterhead was official but sterile, the language guarded. The transfer to APRO was framed as an opportunity for advancement, but Reed sensed it as exile, a containment of inconvenient truths. He poured himself a cup of lukewarm tea from the chipped mug on the windowsill, the bitter taste grounding him as memories of the flight replayed with relentless clarity. The triangular object, its eerie glow, the sudden loss of communication, all played over in his mind like a muted film, demanding interpretation, demanding belief. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was his wingman, hesitant but resolute. I'm coming with you, he said simply, voice steady, the bond forged in the twilight of disbelief unspoken but understood. Reed allowed himself a thin smile, the first in hours. Good, we'll need each other. As they packed their meager belongings, the base stirred to life with the distant sounds of engines and footsteps. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and damp concrete, the familiar smells of a place on the edge of the ordinary and the inexplicable. Before leaving, Reed took one last walk across the airfield, the frost-tipped grass crunching beneath his boots. The sky above was a pale canvas, stars fading with the coming day. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the silent watcher waited, patient, inscrutable, and waiting to be understood. He paused by the edge of the runway, the cold wind tugging at his jacket. His breath formed a thin mist in the air, fragile and fleeting. The quiet signal had been sent. Now, it was time to listen. The journey to London was a blur of grey skies and rain-slicked roads. Reed sat beside his wingman in the nondescript government vehicle, the hum of the engine a steady undercurrent to his swirling thoughts. The city approached in muted waves of concrete and shadow, yet Reed felt detached, like a man set adrift in a familiar yet alien landscape. At the APRO offices, the small, cramped rooms smelled of old paper, dust, and warm electronics, a stark contrast to the sterile air of Ashworth. As they entered, a quiet woman in her 50s, Miriam Kendrick, greeted them with a nod, her sharp eyes assessing the newcomers with quiet intensity. She was the archivist, keeper of secrets long buried, and her presence felt like a bastion of stability amid the unknown. Reed's gaze drifted to the cluttered desks, the scattered files and faded photographs pinned carefully on corkboards. A soft, rhythmic tapping from Eleanor Vance, a young intelligence analyst, filled the background as she worked at a small terminal, the pen against notebook and metronome to the unspoken tension. The room seemed suspended between past and future, a nexus where facts met speculation, and where Reed's journey toward the truth, tangled deep within the quiet signal, was only beginning. That evening, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Reed sat alone, turning over the fragments of a mystery that no one else would admit existed. The silence was thick, but not empty, charged with expectation. Somewhere beneath the earth and sea, the ancient intelligence watched and waited, sending its probes into the dark, its signals faint but insistent. Reed closed his eyes, the echo of the triangular craft's eerie glow flickering behind his lids. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but in the quiet he found a strange solace. The truth, elusive and profound, beckoned like a distant star, and he would follow it. The air was stale the moment Reed stepped through the narrow doorway of APRO's London office. The faint scent of old paper mingled with the low hum of aging electronics, a thin veil of dust motes caught in the sharp shafts of light spilling through the grimy window. The room was small, cramped at best, with walls lined by shelving groaning under the weight of leather-bound folders and yellowing newspapers. The airbase's sterile sterility was replaced here by the musty intimacy of secrets long kept and half forgotten. Reed's boots echoed softly on the threadbare carpet as he paused, scanning the room. Near a battered desk, a kettle perched atop a battered hot plate, steam curling gently into the air, dissolving the tension like the quiet breath of a coming storm. A window rattled faintly in the cold draught, the murmur of city life distant beyond the grimy glass panes. Somewhere in the back, the rustle of papers and the scratch of pen against paper suggested that this was a place where time moved differently, slowly, deliberately, with the quiet weight of careful thought. A woman emerged from an adjacent room, her dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp beneath thick-rimmed glasses. She carried a notebook, her fingers tapping rhythmically as she approached. "Flight, Lieutenant Reed?" Her voice was steady, the kind that measured words before releasing them into the world. "I'm Eleanor Vance, intelligence analyst at APRO." She offered a small nod, her gaze appraising yet calm. Reed folded his arms, the edges of his uniform creaking softly. "I'm here because of what happened at Ashworth. You've probably read the official report." His voice was rougher than intended, edged with frustration. But that doesn't cover the whole story. Eleanor's pen hovered above her notebook, her eyes never leaving him. "We want the whole story, Lieutenant. Every detail." Her words were gentle but firm, an unspoken invitation to be heard without judgment. From the shadows of the office a man stepped forward. He was tall and lean, his face lined with a quiet intensity that bespoke years of careful observation. The worn corduroy jacket draped over his frame was almost a part of him, frayed at the cuffs, its faded brown fabric blending into the muted tones of the room. Dr. Alistair Finch, he said softly. His eyes held a spark of welcome, tempered by the faintest trace of weariness. You must be Thomas Reed. I've heard some of what you've been through. Reed bristled but held his tongue. Finch gestured toward a battered chair by the desk, worn leather cracked but inviting. Please sit. Tell us everything. We have the time. The silence deepened as Reed settled, the chair creaking beneath his weight. He took a breath, the faint scent of cold rain outside mingling with the underlying musk of old books and electronic circuits. It started the night we were on patrol over the Suffolk coast, he began, voice lower now, more measured. We spotted something moving against the wind. No engine noise, no heat signature, just a triangle of light, silent and steady. Communications started failing, electronics went haywire, then it vanished as suddenly as it appeared. Finch nodded slowly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Eleanor's pen scratched steadily, capturing every word without interruption. The room seemed to hold its breath, cocooning the moment, letting the story settle into its own rhythm. Reed's eyes darkened. The official explanation is a radar glitch, mechanical failure, but I know what I saw. And I'm not the only one. His voice cracked slightly, the weight of disbelief and frustration heavy on his shoulders. Finch's voice was gentle, deliberate. You're not alone. We've catalogued hundreds of similar reports, some stretching back decades. He moved to a battered cabinet, retrieving a large folded map that he spread across the desk. The surface was covered with coloured pins and handwritten notes, tracing the scattered points of countless sightings. Look here. Suffolk is a hotspot. Ashworth, Rendlesham Forest, scattered reports across the county. They form a pattern? Reed leaned in, eyes scanning the map, fingers tracing the faded lines. A slow recognition stirred beneath the anger. So it's not just me. It's been happening for years. Eleanor tapped her pen steadily against her notebook, voice soft but precise. These phenomena aren't isolated incidents. There's a correlation with geological fault lines and intersections of power grids. It's as if something is monitoring the Earth itself. The idea settled in the room like a soft tide, pulling Reed away from his defensive edge. The cold metal of suspicion began to warm into cautious curiosity. Monitoring the Earth, he echoed. You think these things are alive? Finch regarded him with a measured gaze. Not alive in the sense we understand. Something much older, something terrestrial, beneath the ocean floor, hidden from view, but not inactive. A sudden draft brushed past, stirring the papers on the desk. Reed caught the scent of rain on stone, a distant, grounding reminder of the world beyond these cramped walls. He slid the map away slowly, the weight of the revelation settling heavier than before. The quiet was broken by the soft tapping of Eleanor's pen, resuming its rhythm like a heartbeat. You're here to help us find the truth, she said, voice steady. Reed nodded, the tight coil of anger in his chest loosening fractionally. I want to understand what I saw, what it means, whatever's out there. I'm done being kept in the dark. Finch's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. Then we have work to do. He motioned toward the battered filing cabinet, its drawers bristling with decades of unspoken histories. We'll start with what we know and where it leads. Outside, the city's distant murmur blended with the steady drip of rain from gutter to pavement, the world continuing in its indifferent rhythm. Inside the room, light from the dusty windows softened the edges of uncertainty, casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts of secrets yet to be uncovered. Reed's boots shifted on the worn carpet as he stood, the knot inside him loosening just a little more. I'm ready, he said quietly. Eleanor offered him a small smile, her eyes reflecting the same cautious hope. "We're ready too." The three of them stood in the cramped office, a fragile coalition formed in the quiet space between doubt and conviction. Outside, the rain tapered to a gentle patter, the soft sound a steady companion to the unfolding mystery. Finch folded the map carefully, tucking it beneath a heavy stack of files. His gaze lifted to Reed's, steady and unflinching. "You're not alone in this, not anymore." Reed looked around the cluttered room, the worn chairs, the stacks of papers, the faint smell of earth and rain seeping through the window frame. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, a faint ember of something like hope stirred within him. The quiet signal was faint, elusive, but it had found its listener, and the search was only just beginning. The worn clock on the wall ticked resolutely, its steady yet unobtrusive rhythm a metronome for the room's tentative new routine. The cramped APRO office in London had settled into a quiet hum of activity. The musty scent of old paper mingled with the faint aroma of Eleanor's brewing tea, a ritual she had already adopted as a balm against the late January chill. Through the narrow window, the city's damp grey filtered in, cloaking the streets in a soft, relentless drizzle that tapped rhythmically against the pane. Thomas Reed leaned against the edge of the battered metal desk, his RAF uniform replaced by a simple woolen jumper that did little to soften the sharp edges of his military bearing. His eyes, dark and earnest, traced the scattered papers and maps Finch had laid out, each one marked with neat annotations and clusters of pinpricks that told stories of strange lights and unexplained signals. The triangular shape he had witnessed near the Suffolk coast was more than just a singular anomaly. It was a node in a sprawling web of incidents stretching back decades. Eleanor sat cross-legged in her chair, tapping her pen thoughtfully against her notebook. "The preliminary report you brought, there's a mention of an energy pulse," she said quietly, voice steady, but edged with curiosity. "It's buried under the radar returns and the pilot's testimony, but the data's there. Did you notice that?" Reed nodded slowly, a crease forming between his brows. "I did. It wasn't just visual. The cockpit instruments, everything flickered. For a few seconds the panel was a ghostly dance of static and dead zones. No heat signature, no engine noise, yet all the electronics were scrambled." "Exactly," Finch said, straightening his posture and smoothing his corduroy jacket with a habitual motion. "The energy pulse is subtle but significant. It aligns with intermittent power fluctuations recorded in the area. The triangulation of those pulses may be our first tangible lead." The room fell into a reflective silence, the soft creak of the radiator and the occasional murmur of distant traffic filling the space around them. Finch walked over to the whiteboard cluttered with scribbles and diagrams, his finger tracing a jagged line representing the geological fault beneath Ashworth. If the phenomenon correlates with fault lines and man-made power grids, then the energy pulse isn't incidental. It's a communication signal or a response. Eleanor's eyes flicked up from her notebook, the faint bruise of dark circles beneath them a testament to many sleepless nights spent parsing data. "But the MOD won't just hand over the raw radar data," she murmured. "They'll shield it behind layers of bureaucracy and classified protocols." Finch gave a dry smile, the sort that suggested he'd tangled with bureaucratic labyrinths before. "That's why we don't approach them with a direct request for the incident report. Too obvious, too sensitive. Instead, we invoke the maintenance and archiving directives. They have to retain and provide raw data for equipment calibration and system integrity audits." Reed raised an eyebrow. "So, we ask for the raw radar data under the guise of technical verification?" "Precisely," Finch replied, his voice low and measured. It's a paper trail they can't deny without raising suspicion. Once we have the unfiltered data, we can analyze the pulse in detail, cross-reference anomalies, and, if we're lucky, pin down the source. The thought of delving into the raw electronic echoes of that night reignited a spark in Reed's eyes. For the first time since the incident, the weight of frustration seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious determination. What's the wait time on a request like that? Finch shrugged. Could be days, weeks even. The files are stored off-site, archived, probably untouched since the incident. That's part of the problem. Eleanor reached for the keyboard of the battered laptop on the desk, her fingers dancing with practiced efficiency. I'll draft the request tonight. Use official channels with the right citations. If anything, it'll buy us time to prepare. Reed watched her, the tapping of her pen now replaced by the rhythmic clatter of keys. You work fast, he said, his tone a mixture of admiration and surprise. It's what keeps the wheels turning, she replied with a faint smile. Tea helps too, you'll get used to it. Finch joined them again, his hands clasped behind his back. While we wait, we ought to revisit the Ashworth incident in full detail. The reports, the pilot logs, permission slips for patrol routes, all of it. There's a pattern beneath the surface, and every overlooked detail might be a thread to follow. Reed nodded, pulling a notebook from his satchel. I can provide additional operational insights. The way the radar interacted with the object, the flight path adjustments, the immediate communications blackout. It all fits into an operational picture. The trio leaned closer over the cluttered desk, the warm glow of the desk lamp casting elongated shadows on the pale walls. Outside, the rain intensified, a gentle drumming that seemed to sync with the pulse they sought to understand. Eleanor brought up the preliminary report on the screen. Look here, she said, pointing to a faint spike in the energy readings. It's subtle but definite. At exactly 22:47 GMT, the radar picked up an unusual return, a pulse that doesn't match any known aircraft signature. Reed's gaze sharpened. That matches the time I saw the lights. The triangle hovered just beyond radar range, but the pulse suggests it was actively interacting with the system. Finch added, and it coincides with a localized power grid fluctuation. The circuit breakers in the nearby substation tripped without cause. The timing is too precise to be coincidence. The room grew colder as the night deepened, the window fogging slightly where the warmth inside met the chill outside. Reed rubbed his hands together, a gesture more of habit than warmth. We should consider the possibility that the object's technology is attuned to human electrical infrastructure. Eleanor nodded, her expression contemplative. It might be using power lines as conduits or markers, a network to map or monitor geological stress points. Finch's gaze lingered on the fault line map. Which brings us back to the larger enigma, the link between these phenomena and the Earth itself. Our ancestors never imagined electronic hum would reveal what lies beneath. Reed leaned forward, voice low. If it's true, then what we're dealing with isn't extraterrestrial. It's something terrestrial, but ancient, something that's evolved alongside the planet, hidden in the deep. A brief silence ensued, filled only by the soft rustle of papers and the distant murmur of city life. Eleanor's fingers hovered above the keyboard, then she typed a terse, carefully worded message to the archival department. Finch read over it once more before giving a curt nod of approval. Sent, she said quietly, the word hanging in the air like a promise. Reed exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders loosening for the first time in days. Now we wait, he said, but I don't like waiting. Action is better. Finch smiled faintly. Patience is a skill we'll all need more of. The truth isn't a thunderclap, it's a murmur beneath the waves, a quiet signal that demands careful listening. Outside, the rain began to taper off, leaving the streets glistening under the amber glow of street lamps. The city exhaled a soft breath of damp night air, and inside the little office, the three figures sat in shared anticipation, the weight of unseen patterns pressing gently upon them. The minutes stretched into hours. Eleanor brewed a fresh pot of tea, the steam curling lazily upward as Finch examined the maps once again. Reed sat by the window, watching the fog roll over the rooftops, his thoughts drifting back to the cold sea air of Suffolk and the enigmatic light that had changed everything. A sudden chime from the laptop drew their attention. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keys, eyes scanning the incoming message. "It's from the archive," she announced, voice steady but tinged with hope. "They've acknowledged the request. Processing will begin first thing in the morning." Finch folded his hands calmly. A star. Reed rose and stretched, the stiffness of the day settling into his bones. "Tomorrow, then, we begin." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, we listen." The quiet settled back into the room, a soft companion to the murmur of the city's night. Outside, the earth whispered beneath the rain, and somewhere deep beneath the waves an ancient intelligence waited for what none of them yet knew. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter by the time they returned to the APRO office, the cool air entering with them, bringing the damp scent of wet stone walls and cold pavement. The faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead mingled with the soft creaks of the aging building's settling bones. The package of radar data sat on the dusty desk, a pale blue envelope marked with official stamps and timestamps, waiting like a secret ready to unravel. Eleanor moved first, her fingers brushing the envelope's edges with the lightest touch, as if afraid to disturb the quiet promise contained within. Alistair Finch stood nearby, pacing slowly with his hands clasped behind his back, the familiar rough texture of his corduroy jacket sleeves brushing against his palms in a rhythmic motion. His breath was steady, measured, the quiet confidence of a man used to waiting for truths to reveal themselves in their own time. Reed, silent at first, leaned close to observe the envelope, his uniform immaculate even after hours away from the base, his dark eyes reflecting a mix of tension and hopeful anticipation. Eleanor broke the stillness with the sharp click of a letter opener, the blade sliding through the paper like a whisper. Inside lay 2 small reels of magnetic tape and a note from Ashworth's data archive. Raw radar logs from 2230 to 2300 GMT 10th March. The words were typed in a standard font, but the paper's slight yellowing spoke of careful preservation. Eleanor's pen tapped lightly against her notebook, the sound crisp and deliberate, as she mentally prepared to decode the mystery within. The trio moved down the narrow corridor to the signals analysis suite, a forgotten relic nestled in the basement of the building. The door creaked open to reveal a cramped room lined with racks of faded equipment. Knobs, dials, and meters coated in a thin layer of dust that caught the faint glow of a single desk lamp. The hum of old electronics stirred to life as Finch flipped switches, the room filling with the low, steady whine of motors and tape decks, awakening after decades of silence. Reed settled into the worn leather chair, adjusting the reel-to-reel player with practiced hands. The tang of warm electronics and ozone filled the space as the tape began to spin, the magnetic hiss giving way to bursts of static and faint signals. Eleanor pulled her notebook closer, her eyes narrowing as she tuned her ears to the subtle shifts in frequency, searching for patterns hidden beneath the noise. As the playback continued, a series of blips and echoes unfolded across the screen of a cathode ray tube, tracing arcs and swoops that defied conventional flight paths. The radar blips flickered and danced like fireflies, caught in a restless breeze, moving in sudden, impossible maneuvers that no known aircraft could replicate. Finch's gaze remained steady, his mind cataloguing each anomaly with measured precision, while Eleanor's fingers raced to mark timestamps and intensities. The room seemed to pulse with energy as the data revealed itself, the slow cadence of the signals drawing them deeper into a hidden narrative. Reed's lips parted as he whispered, "That's the exact moment I saw it. 22:47. Triangular shape, silent, and then that sudden blink." His voice was low, tinged with disbelief, yet stripped of the frustration that had previously clouded his tone. Eleanor's eyes lit with sudden clarity. "Look here," she said, pointing to a spike on the oscilloscope. The display showed a sharp, intense burst, an energy pulse radiating across a wide spectrum. It was unlike any natural interference, deliberate in its signature. "This isn't random, it's a signal, controlled, technological." Finch nodded slowly, the weight of the discovery settling into the room like a mist. "A message, or a beacon," he mused, voice quiet but resolute. "It's reaching out or marking something, and the timing, right at the power grid fluctuation nearby. It's engaging with our infrastructure." Silence enveloped them then, thick and contemplative. The faint hiss of the tape was the only sound, a reminder that this was the first tangible trace of an intelligence beyond their understanding. The implications rippled through their minds, unsettling yet profoundly compelling. Reed leaned back, fingers steepled, as he stared at the screens that betrayed the impossible choreography of the unknown. Eleanor's pen finally stilled. "If it's terrestrial," she said softly, "then we've been looking up for answers when the source has been beneath us all along. This changes everything." Her words hung in the air, the gravity of their realization sinking in with the weight of centuries. The tapes continued to reveal more, the strange echoes, the silent gaps, the regulated bursts of energy that suggested control and purpose. Finch's brow furrowed slightly as he cross-referenced the timestamps with Reed's recollections and the power grid records. The coincidence was undeniable. The phenomenon was tied to the Earth's own rhythms, its faults and fractures, as if communicating through the very veins of the planet. Reed broke the silence again, a trace of that dark humor flickering through his voice. "Maybe it's the Earth's own heartbeat, and we're finally learning how to listen." The smile was fleeting, but genuine, a crack in the walls of his frustration. Eleanor smiled faintly in response, the tapping of her pen resuming with renewed purpose as she jotted down hypotheses. Finch walked to the window, looking out at the rain-drenched streets beyond. The night was deepening, shadows pooling in the corners of the city like secrets waiting to be uncovered. His reflection in the glass was that of a man caught between worlds, the rational and the inscrutable. "This signal," he said, turning back, "it demands a response. We must understand its language, its intent." Eleanor reached for a nearby bundle of cables and began connecting the equipment to a larger analysis console, the gentle clatter of connectors clicking home filling the room. The glow from the monitors intensified, bathing the cramped suite in a soft, bluish light. "We have the data," she said firmly. "Now, we have to decode the message beneath the signal." Reed stood beside Finch, watching the patterns emerge and shift on the screens. "We need to verify the source," he said, voice steady but edged with urgency. "If it's interacting with power lines, there's a network here, something more complex than a single object." The room fell into a rhythm of quiet collaboration, the three of them immersed in the unfolding enigma. The hum of old machines, the scratch of pen on paper, the occasional low murmur of shared insights formed a symphony of investigation. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The tapes had shown them fragments, glimpses into an intelligence both ancient and adaptive, elusive but undeniably present. Finch's methodical mind catalogued every detail, every anomaly, while Eleanor's analytical prowess passed the data into manageable threads. Reed's experience grounded their theories in operational reality, reminding them of what might be at stake. At last, the tape came to an end, the reel slowing with a mechanical sigh. The room was dim now, the glow from the monitors the only light. They sat together in silence, the gravity of their discovery pressing softly against the edges of their consciousness. This was the first incontrovertible evidence, a quiet signal from beneath the waves, from a world they had never truly understood. Finch broke the silence, voice low and steady. "We have our proof. Now the question is what we do next." His gaze met Eleanor's and then Reed's, the three of them united by a shared resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with shadows and questions, but for the first time they held a tangible piece of the truth. Eleanor closed her notebook, the tapping of her pen ceasing as she looked up. "We start by tracing the signal's reach, understanding its pattern, its purpose." Her voice carried a hint of cautious hope, a fragile light in the growing darkness. Reed nodded, his frustration replaced by determined focus. "And we keep it quiet for now, until we know more." His words were a vow, a shield against the unknown. The night outside deepened, the rain finally ceasing to fall. The city was silent, the world holding its breath alongside them. In the cramped, dusty room filled with the hum of ancient machines, the quiet signal had spoken. And they were listening. The rain had turned steady, a soft but unrelenting hiss against the grimy window of the APRO office. The dim light from the antique desk lamp pooled over scattered printouts and flickered on the oscilloscope's fractal lines. Finch stood by the window, his gaze tracing the blurred outline of the London rooftops, the wet slate tiles glistening under the faint, jaundiced streetlights. He rubbed the corner of his mouth beneath the thin moustache, the weight of the night settling in his chest like cold stone. The data on the screen murmured an almost inaudible call, but one he could not yet decipher. Eleanor leaned forward, her fingertips dancing lightly across the keyboard of their borrowed analysis console. The soft tap-tap of her pen against a battered notebook filled the space between the occasional hum and crackle of the ancient equipment. "These pulses," she said quietly, not looking up, "they're like a rhythm, but not random. Someone, or something, is orchestrating it. The way it aligns with the power grid surges is deliberate." Her voice was sharp, but tempered with a cautious excitement that made Finch glance at her for a moment, catching the earnest gleam in her eyes. Reed, seated heavily on a metal chair that creaked under his weight, drummed his fingers on his knee. His uniform was crisply folded over one arm, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and rain-dampened canvas. "I saw that thing," he said, voice low and steady. "That silent triangle, it wasn't some trick of the light or a weather balloon. It was there, hovering, watching. The signal matches the time exactly." His eyes, dark and resolute, met Finch's. "Whatever we're chasing, it's here, on our turf." Finch turned away from the window and paced the cramped room, the worn heels of his corduroy jacket brushing against the dusty floorboards. The air was thick with anticipation and the metallic tang of old circuitry. "If this is a communication," he murmured, "we need more than raw data. We need context, history, precedent, something the current files won't give us." He stopped, fingertips resting on the edge of the battered desk. "The Ashdown archives, it's where they've kept the indexed surveillance and incident reports since the 60s. We're talking decades of classified materials, some never seen outside of the ministry. Eleanor sat back, lips pursed, as she considered the implications. Ashdown's under strict lock and key. Sterling won't release anything without a direct order. And even then... Her voice trailed off. The unspoken threat of bureaucratic stone walls hung in the air. The archives were a fortress of silence, forgotten but fiercely guarded. Reed grunted and rubbed his face. We're going to need a better angle than just curiosity. Sterling's old guard, and he doesn't like surprises, especially if it involves anything that might expose the ministry's version of truth. His eyes flickered to the chipped phone on the desk. Maybe it's time to cut through the red tape. Finch nodded, his fingers curling around the cold handset. His voice was calm, but carried a subtle steel edge as he dialed. The line rang once, twice, then a smooth, measured voice answered, precise as a scalpel. Sir Malcolm Sterling. Malcolm, it's Finch. The word was clipped, careful. I need access to the Ashdown archives. There's a pulse detected, anomalous, intermittent. It could be a radar fault, a serious flaw in our air defense network. Finch's tone was clinical, the urgency masked behind a veil of bureaucratic necessity. We need to investigate within 48 hours. A pause measured and inscrutable. Finch could almost hear the cautious tread of Sterling's mind weighing options. Dr. Finch, you understand the sensitivity. The archives contain material classified beyond the usual channels. Unauthorized access could threaten national security. The voice was calm, unswerving. Why should I grant this? The pulse coincides with multiple unexplained flight patterns. If it's a system error, it could compromise airspace integrity, a blind spot. I'm certain you'll agree that erring on the side of caution is prudent. Finch's gaze drifted to the hazy London skyline, the rain sliding down the glass in uneven rivulets. For the sake of national defense, I ask for your cooperation. Sterling's reply came after a long silence, the faintest trace of reluctant concession threading through his words. Very well. 48 hours access granted, but I expect a full report the moment you conclude your inquiry. And Finch, be discreet. The line went dead. Finch replaced the handset and stood silently for a moment, the gravity of the concession settling over him like a tide. Eleanor's gaze lifted, sharp and expectant. Reed exhaled slowly, a flicker of something like triumph passing behind his steady eyes. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle by the time their small rented car swept out of London's dark arteries, heading north. Finch's fingers tapped an uneven rhythm on the steering wheel, the worn leather supple beneath them. The motorway blurred past, a ribbon of wet asphalt reflecting dim, smeared headlights. Eleanor sat beside him, her notebook balanced on her lap, eyes fixed on the shifting shadows beyond the window. Reed was in the back, staring ahead, quiet as the night. The Peak District rose like a spectral giant through the mist as they approached. The hills loomed, cloaked in a velvet darkness, pierced only by intermittent flashes of lightning that lingered on the horizon like distant watchfires. Finch slowed the car, the engine's hum low and steady beneath the measured scratch of the windshield wipers. The turnoff to the Ashdown archives was unmarked, a narrow gravel path that curled like a secret into the folds of the hills. As they passed the rusted gate, the buildings emerged gradually, a complex of squat, nondescript structures nestled at the mouth of a repurposed slate mine. The air was crisp and cold, laced with the sharp scent of damp stone and ancient earth. Eleanor shivered despite her jacket, and Reed's breath steamed faintly in the chill. Inside, the archives unfolded like a cathedral of secrets. The cavernous space was lit by soft, indirect lighting that cast long shadows along the vaults of steel shelving. The low hum of climate control mingled with the distant echo of footsteps and the faint rustling of paper. Rows upon rows of meticulously labelled grey boxes stretched into the dark, forming an endless labyrinth of memory. They were met by Miriam Kendrick, the archivist, a woman whose presence was as still and impenetrable as the archives themselves. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her face a mask of quiet authority. She spoke little, her tone clipped but respectful. "You have 48 hours. Follow me." The trio followed her through winding corridors that smelled faintly of old leather bindings and mineral dust. They passed sealed vaults, reinforced doors, and security panels blinking silently in the dim. Finch noted the deliberate care in the layout, a fortress built not to celebrate history, but to contain it. The weight of decades hung palpably in the air, pressing on their shoulders with invisible hands. Miriam led them to a small, windowless room, simple but functional. A heavy oak table sat beneath a cluster of soft, amber lights, and the walls resonated with a quiet austerity. "Here," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "you will find the files you seek, but understand this, nothing leaves this room." Finch nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. The files were their lifeline and their chain. Eleanor began unpacking printed materials and data drives, while Reed settled into the cramped chair, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. Finch's eyes scanned the first official reports, the typewritten memos yellowed with age, the ink faded but still sharp enough to convey secrets long buried. Hours passed in a steady flow of discovery and quiet murmurs. They sifted through incident reports from the 1960s. Flights diverted without explanation. Radar blips dismissed as electrical interference. Whispered notes about unidentified phenomena, carefully excised from official logs. A pattern emerged beneath the surface, a thread connecting the dots across time and silence. Eleanor paused over a fragile folder, her brow furrowed. "Look at this," she murmured, tracing a hand over a map dotted with red marker aligned precisely along fault lines intersecting with power grids. "It's the same network, the pulse we detected. It's part of something much larger, older. The government's been tracking it for decades." Reed exhaled slowly, the weight of that realization settling over him like mist on the moor. They knew, they've always known, and they've kept it quiet. Finch folded his hands, the thin fabric of his jacket rustling softly. "This goes deeper than we imagined. The archives are a testament to that silence, a silence we're now breaking." His voice was steady, measured, the cadence of a man preparing to step into a void. Night pressed against the thick stone walls as they continued their work, the world beyond the archives fading into a shadowed whisper. The quiet signal beneath the earth waited, patient and unyielding, as the three of them listened, searching for the words to answer its call. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and aged paper as the heavy steel door groaned open, admitting the trio into the Ashdown archives. A muted hum of climate control machines echoed faintly, blending with the distant drip of condensation. Pale, flickering fluorescent lights hung from high concrete beams, casting long shadows over towering rows of metal shelving, each shelf burdened with boxes and folders that seemed to stretch endlessly into the cavernous space. The walls, rough-hewn from the slate mine's natural rock, absorbed and reflected the cool chill that settled deep into the bones, a sensory reminder of the weight of history underground. Miriam Kendrick stood just inside the threshold, her posture rigid but composed, as if she herself were part of the architecture. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding beneath thick glasses, appraised them carefully. With a nod, she gestured toward a narrow aisle, the path to the restricted section. 48 hours, no exceptions, she said crisply, the faintest trace of weariness softening her voice. You'll find the documents you seek within these vaults, but I'll be monitoring your progress closely. Any irregularities and access is revoked immediately. Finch exchanged a glance with Eleanor and Reed before stepping forward, the familiar weight of his corduroy jacket settling like an old friend around his shoulders. The dust motes in the air caught the light, drifting lazily as they descended into the depths. Eleanor's pen tapped softly against her notebook, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant mechanical thrum. Reed's gaze lingered on the rows of files, each one a sealed fragment of untold stories, waiting patiently in the subterranean cathedral. They paused at the first shelf, a monolith of metal and faded cardboard, its labels painstakingly typed decades before. Eleanor reached for a box marked 1960s. Flight incident reports, sliding it out with practiced care. The box exhaled a faint mustiness, mingled with the sterile metallic tang of the archive itself. Inside, tightly packed folders bore titles in neat script. Radar Anomalies, 1968. North Sea Flight Diversions, 1977. Coastal Surveillance Data, 1965. Eleanor's fingers traced the edges of a folder titled Northern Scotland, 1968. As she flipped it open, the muted scratch of brittle paper seemed loud in the stillness. The report described a series of radar blips over the highlands, initially dismissed as atmospheric interference. Yet, pilots reported fleeting lights that moved with an unnatural precision, vanishing abruptly. The language was clinical, the tone cautious, but beneath it lay a thread of unease. Reed bent closer, his brow furrowed as he read aloud fragments of pilot testimonies, voices long silent but still vibrant on the page. Next came a dossier detailing incidents over the North Sea in 1977. The files spoke of multiple flights rerouted suddenly, crews baffled by unexplained electronic disruptions. Maps sketched annotations where UAPs had been sighted, singular blips coinciding with the confluence of undersea fault lines and offshore power cables. Eleanor's analytical mind pieced together the geographical puzzle, lines on maps intersecting in a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. The pulse they detected today was echoed decades earlier, a subtle, persistent rhythm beneath the surface of official narratives. The air grew cooler as they descended further into the archives, the silence thick with anticipation and the unspoken questions that filled the space between them. Finch's pace slowed, his eyes scanning the shelves for the file he most needed to find. Then, nestled between two weathered binders, he spotted it. Suffolk Coastal Incident, January 1965. The folder was notably thicker, its edges frayed from years of handling, as if it had been pulled often or transported between hands with great care. Finch's fingers hesitated before lifting it from its resting place. The weight of the file seemed disproportionate to its size, as though it held more than mere paper within. They gathered around a rickety wooden table, bathed in the pale glow of a hanging lamp. Eleanor set her notebook down and drew a magnifying glass from her bag, preparing to examine each document meticulously. Reed poured tea from a thermos, the steam mingling with the cool air, a small warmth in the otherwise austere chamber. As they worked through the contents, the reports unfolded a narrative both familiar and elusive. Pilot statements detailed sudden radar losses and visual sightings of an object, silent and unyielding, hovering above the waves. Ground radar operators noted a recurring pulse, an electronic signature unlike anything catalogued. Finch's fingers lingered on photographs, grainy images of a metallic fragment, irregular in shape and composition, retrieved from the beach near the crash site. The metal shimmered strangely beneath the flash of the camera, as if defying conventional alloys. But then, a disquieting discovery. Pages were missing. Several crucial reports, technical analyses, and correspondence had been removed, excised from the record as if to erase their significance entirely. Eleanor's sharp eyes scanned the file cover, where a faint stamp indicated the authorization for removal. The name was typed clearly. M. Sterling, Junior M.O.D. Officer. Finch's pulse quickened, a slow tightening in his chest. The realization dawned with a cold clarity. Sterling was not just the cautious, measured official they had encountered. He was deeply entwined in this history, the architect of silence stretching back decades. Reed's expression darkened, the weight of suppressed truth pressing heavily upon him. Eleanor's pen stilled, the rhythmic tapping ceasing as she absorbed the implications. Miriam's footsteps echoed softly in the distance, a reminder of the ticking clock. Finch carefully replaced the folder, his mind already racing through the labyrinth of secrets they had just begun to unravel. The pulse, a subtle, quiet signal threading through time, was more than an anomaly. It was a message, an echo of an intelligence ancient and inscrutable, shielded by layers of fear and silence. Outside, a low wind whispered through the mine's vents, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant rain. The archives seemed to hold their breath alongside the team, guarding the fragile boundary between known and unknown. Finch rose slowly, his gaze lingering on the shelves that stretched toward infinity. They had found the past, but the future remained uncertain, a silent signal calling them deeper into the dark. The narrow shaft of light from the lamp flickered once, then steadied. Eleanor closed her notebook with a decisive snap. "We need to trace Sterling's trail," she said quietly. "His fingerprints are all over this." Reed nodded, the lines of his face etched in resolve. "And if he's protecting something, it won't be easy to confront." Finch pulled his jacket tighter around him, the familiar fabric a small anchor. "Then we proceed carefully. The truth is there, waiting in the shadows. We just have to listen for the quiet signal." The air in the archive was cool and still, carrying the faint, musky scent of aged paper and a trace of damp stone that seeped from the walls. Alistair Finch sat hunched over the wide oak table, the harsh yellow light from the overhead bulb casting long shadows across the documents spread before him like a constellation of forgotten histories. He rubbed his chin slowly, the stubble catching the light, while Eleanor Vance leaned in, her brow furrowed, tapping her pen against the edge of her notebook in a steady rhythm. Thomas Reed stood nearby, arms folded, his gaze shifting between the fragmented intelligence laid bare on the yellowing pages and the sealed evidence bag that lay near the file's end. Finch broke the silence, voice low and deliberate. "Here, the Coast Guard's report from the night of November 2nd, 1965. It's the first on-site account. Listen to this." He cleared his throat softly and read aloud. "At approximately 22:47, a series of unexplained lights were observed hovering above the North Sea, near the Suffolk coast. The vessel's radar experienced intermittent failures coinciding precisely with the appearance of these lights. No atmospheric phenomena were recorded at that time." Eleanor's eyes flickered up, sharp and calculating. The correlation between radar failure and visual apparition is consistent with the other files we've seen, but it's the precision of the timing that's most compelling. She pointed at the line on the paper, her fingertip tracing the neat, typewritten words. Look here, no atmospheric phenomena. That eliminates weather anomalies, lightning, or electrical storms. Reed shifted his weight, the faint creak of his boots on the stone floor echoing in the quiet. Radar failures not uncommon out at sea, especially with the old hardware, but this is too synchronized. It's as if the object was actively tampering with the systems. His voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of frustration, the frustration of a pilot who had witnessed inexplicable events firsthand. Finch nodded and flicked through the next pages. Pilot statements, 2 RAF interceptors scrambled from Bentwaters. Both reported a silent hovering object, metallic in appearance but unlike any known craft. One pilot describes it as reflective yet matte, as if absorbing light. He paused, fingers hovering over the stapled bundle. The descriptions match the fragment we found in the earlier files. It's joined from the same folder. Eleanor leaned closer, exhaling a breath that fogged the cold glass of her spectacles. The weight of these testimonies, they're consistent, yet they bear the unmistakable signs of restraint. Look here, the language is clinical. No speculation, no embellishment, just facts, as told by men sworn to duty. Reed's eyes drifted to the corner of the table where a small, sealed evidence bag sat untouched. The fragment inside was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen that seemed to absorb the dim light. Irregular facets caught a faint glimmer, as though the metal had been forged in some unknowable process. The analysts called it inconclusive, he murmured. No known alloy, no identifiable origin. Finch exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling deep into his chest. And no follow-up reports. No further investigation after the initial analysis. He tapped his finger against the folder, the sound sharp and deliberate. The trail stops cold here. His gaze flickered between the two, somber but resolute. We have to take this with us. The fragment, the file. We can't leave it behind. Eleanor glanced around the room, eyes lingering on Miriam Kendrick, the archivist, who was absorbed in cataloguing a set of brittle maps at the far desk. Her posture was meticulous, almost ritualistic, as if she were guarding the past as sacred ground. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Kendrick doesn't seem to notice. We'll have to be careful. Reed nodded, the hard lines of his face softening slightly. I know what it means to carry secrets like this. 50 years of silence is a heavy burden. He focused on the evidence bag again. This is more than just a fragment. It's the key to everything we've been piecing together. Finch pulled his worn corduroy jacket tighter around his shoulders, the fabric rough beneath his fingertips. The dim light caught the fibers, faded with age and countless wearings. It's the physical proof we need, not just anecdotal evidence or radar blips. This is tangible. His voice was measured, but beneath it there was the faintest tremor of urgency. We have to move carefully. Sterling's shadow looms over all of this. Eleanor's pen stilled. His name on the authorization to remove documents is a fracture in the official narrative. We're dealing with a cover-up that's been institutionalized for decades. She looked up, eyes sharp as flint. And that means the danger isn't just academic, it's personal. The fragment in the evidence bag seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as if it bore a silent message meant only for those who dared to listen. Finch reached out cautiously, fingertips hovering over the plastic, before he lifted it, careful not to disturb the seal. The coldness of the metal reached through the sleeve of the bag, a subtle, unsettling sensation that made him shiver despite the warm stillness of the room. He laid the bag beside the folder, watching as the small object caught the pool of light from the overhead lamp. The oily blackness seemed to shift like a living shadow trapped within solid form. Finch's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is a signal we've ignored for far too long." Eleanor nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder with reverence. "And I think it's time we start answering it." Reed took a steadying breath and glanced back toward the narrow stairwell that led to the surface. "The tides are turning. We're no longer just observers." His dark eyes held Finch's for a long moment, unspoken resolve passing between them. Miriam Kendrick looked up briefly, her gaze passing over the trio with a quiet curiosity that bore no judgment. Her hands paused mid-record. Then, after a moment, she returned to her work, the faint clack of her keyboard resuming like the heartbeat of the archive itself. Finch folded the folder carefully, then slid it into his satchel with deliberate care. The fragment followed, nestled beside it. The weight of both felt heavier than their size suggested, anchoring them to the long-buried truths beneath layers of dust and silence. They exchanged a glance, an acknowledgement of the crossroads they'd reached. Eleanor gathered her notebook and pen, her mind already racing through the web of connections, patterns waiting to be unraveled. Next step, trace Sterling, find out how deep this goes. Reed squared his shoulders. And find out what he's afraid of. Finch stood last, the aged wood of the chair scraping softly against the stone floor. He paused in the dim light, looking toward the archive's narrow entrance. Beyond, the day was waning, soft drizzle tapping against the small window panes, the grey light of late afternoon folding quietly over London's rooftops. "We've pulled back the curtain," Finch murmured to himself, voice swallowed by the silence. "Now we watch the stage." Together they moved toward the stairwell, the echoes of their footsteps, swallowed by the archive's ancient walls. The fragment's dark mystery nestled safely within their possession, a quiet signal waiting patiently beneath the boundless sky. The late afternoon light filtered through the narrow panes of Finch's flat in Bloomsbury, slanting across shelves bowed with books or torn papers, the dust motes swirling gently in the stale air. Finch sat hunched at his battered wooden desk, the fragment cradled in a square of black velvet like some sacred relic. The oily sheen caught the light intermittently, refracting it in hues that seemed almost liquid. He traced the raised, irregular facets with a fingertip, the metal cool and strangely alive beneath his skin. His mobile vibrated softly on the cluttered desk. Eleanor's name flashed. He answered with a curt, "Eleanor." Her voice was low, pragmatic. "I've been thinking, we can't analyze this through official channels. Sterling's reach is too wide, and if they get wind of it, the fragment disappears, and so do we." A pause. "I have a contact, someone who won't ask questions, just results." Finch's mind latched on immediately. "Aris Thorne," he said. The name alone conjured a man whose reputation teetered on the edge of genius and madness. "Exactly, I'll arrange it." Eleanor's voice softened, but it's almost a reassurance. "Be careful." The evening deepened, the city's muted clatter settling into a hush. Finch slid the fragment into a protective case and tucked it under his arm. The air outside was cool and dry, tinged faintly with the scent of rain yet to come. The streets hummed with a lazy pulse, distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. He made his way to the university, the ancient stone buildings looming as sentinels of forgotten knowledge. The fading light pooled in the courtyards, shadows stretching long and thin. Aris Thorne's laboratory was a chaos of glassware, instruments and half-finished experiments, a space that smelled of ozone and metal. The wild curls of his grey hair framed a face etched with lines of concentration and whimsy. He greeted Finch with a crooked smile and a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "Alistair, my dear fellow, what peculiar gift have you brought me this time?" Finch placed the fragment carefully on the lab bench. Aris leaned forward, reverence flickering in his eyes. Is this the same artifact from Ashworth? The fragment lay under a cluster of warm halogen lamps, its facets glowing softly like a heart in repose. Harry circled it, murmuring observations about its texture and form. This is no ordinary alloy. The surface is both matte and reflective in a way that defies conventional optics. He adjusted a magnifying lens and studied the metal's grain with almost religious focus. If I'm right, this could be a door, a threshold to something utterly unknown. Finch watched quietly, the weight of the moment pressing against the sterile lab air. Aris set about preparing the fragment for mass spectrometry. The machine itself was an archaic beast, humming low and steady, a heart pumping unseen rhythms through the lab's veins. They placed the fragment into the instruments chamber, and the process began, a slow, deliberate sequence of ionizing and fragmenting, the whisper of electrons peeling away secrets buried deep in the metal's core. Finch and Eleanor settled into waiting, the hours folding over them like a slow tide. The room grew darker as the evening turned to night. Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one, a lattice of cold yellow across the black canvas. Finch paced, the soft scrape of his corduroy jacket the only sound beside the machine's pulse. Eleanor tapped her pen rhythmically against her notebook, eyes flicking between screen and fragment. Aris sat cross-legged on a stool, absently twisting a metallic pen, his mind elsewhere. The silence was not empty, it was pregnant, expectant. Finally, the data spilled forth, a cascade of numbers and graphs on the glowing display. Aris's brow furrowed deeply as he examined the readouts. Impossible, he breathed, the word a fragile whisper. These isotopic ratios, they do not correspond to any known terrestrial element, nor do they match meteorites or cosmic dust. Finch leaned in. The reality dawned slowly, a cold certainty in the shadows. The fragment was not of this earth. Ares shuffled through old reference texts, his wild hair catching the lamplight like a halo of scattered ideas. If these measurements hold, this metal predates our solar system's formation, or is forged in conditions alien to natural cosmic processes. He looked up, the eccentric spark in his eyes dimmed by the gravity of the discovery. It shouldn't exist anywhere in the known universe? Eleanor exhaled slowly, the room closing in around them. The clock ticked steadily into the early hours, a metronome marking the passage of a sleepless night. Finch's thoughts drifted, memories of that Cotswolds field flickering behind his eyelids, those brief, luminous shapes hovering silently in the dark. The fragment, now confirmed an enigma, was a tangible link to that elusive truth. Yet the implications churned uneasily within him. What did it mean for humanity's place in the world? And more pressingly, what force had concealed it for so long? Aris began assembling a dossier of his findings, meticulous notes alongside spectral graphs, isotopic tables annotated with tentative theories. His voice was low, almost reverent, as he hypothesized about materials engineered with unknown physics, perhaps remnants of a technology far beyond human reach. Eleanor added her own observations, noting the fragment's affinity to geophysical phenomena detected at Ashworth. They were mapping a silent constellation of clues, each one more unsettling than the last. A sudden gust rattled the window panes, the scent of impending rain seeping into the lab. The fragment seemed to pulse faintly beneath the sterile lamps, as if resonating with some hidden frequency. Finch's gaze narrowed. He wondered if the metal itself was a signal, a message etched in atomic language, intended for those who knew how to listen. The room seemed to contract, the boundaries between past and present blurring under the weight of discovery. Aris, ever restless, began devising new experiments, magnetic susceptibility tests, electromagnetic resonance scans, attempts to stimulate the fragment's facets into response. The lab filled with a low hum of machinery and whispered theorizing. Moments stretched into hours, the trio locked in a shared orbit around a mystery that defied explanation. Finch felt the old cadence of scientific pursuit. The thrill, the dread, the slow burn of illumination piercing the dark. Eleanor's practical mind cut through the haze. If this is genuine, we need to consider the ramifications. Sterling's cover-up makes more sense now. This is not just a security risk, but a fundamental threat to our understanding of reality. Finch nodded, the knot in his chest tightening. We're beyond folklore or mistaken radar blips. We've touched the edges of something immense. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. As dawn crept pale and silver over the city skyline, Aris finally leaned back, exhaustion creasing his features. I'll need to run full isotopic decay chains and compare them with every known sample in the database. This could take weeks. Eleanor bit her lip, the weight of delay pressing on their urgency. Finch folded his arms, mind already racing ahead. We don't have that time. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping rhythmically on the window panes, a quiet percussion that echoed through the lab's stillness. Finch looked once more at the fragment, the oily facets catching a glint of the grey morning light. The quiet signal within it thrummed almost imperceptibly, a call they had no choice but to answer. We move forward, Finch said softly, with or without the world's knowledge. Eleanor and Iris exchanged glances, resolve sharpening in their eyes. The fragment had spoken and they were listening. The path ahead was shadowed, uncertain, but illuminated by a truth too profound to ignore. The city awoke around them, indifferent to the small room where the impossible lay waiting, a secret born of ancient depths and silent stars. The quiet signal pulsed onward, unseen but inexorable, drawing them deeper into the enigma that would define their lives. Dr. Alistair Finch's footsteps echoed softly down the narrow, creaking stairwell of the APRO office, the faint aroma of old paper and warm electronics rising around him like a familiar if somewhat musty cloak. The morning light, pale and hesitant through the grime-smeared window panes, cast long shadows across the cluttered desks and dusty filing cabinets. In his hand, the evidence bag pressed lightly against his thigh, the metal fragment within cool and inert as though it bore its own quiet gravity. Finch felt the weight of it far more acutely than the physical heft, a silent burden that seemed to pulse with hidden purpose. He paused at the door, to the main room, allowing the stillness to settle around him before pushing it open. Eleanor Vance sat at her desk, the low murmur of her tapping pen against her notebook a steady metronome in the silence. Her shoulders were tense, and the faint scent of tea lingered in the air, a small comfort amidst the cold uncertainty they now shared. Finch's arrival stirred her from concentration. She looked up, eyes sharp, but shadowed with fatigue. "Back so soon?" she said, her voice measured, but carrying an undercurrent of curiosity. Finch nodded, setting the bag carefully down on the table between them. "We have more than just questions now." Eleanor rose, crossing to him with a cautious urgency. "What did Aris find? Anything that explains the fragment's properties?" Finch drew a slow breath. "The isotopic ratios, they don't align with anything on Earth or even within our solar system's known materials. It predates the solar system, or perhaps it never belonged to it at all." His voice was steady, but laced with a quiet awe. "It challenges everything we understand about geological time and cosmic origins." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, the pragmatic analyst overriding the initial shock. So it's not just rare, it's impossible. Exactly. Finch's gaze lingered on her face, grateful for her calm in the face of such staggering implications. And yet, it's here, hidden in plain sight. Before Eleanor could respond, the door creaked again and Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed stepped into the room. His immaculate uniform, even off-duty, carried the subtle scent of sea salt and damp wool. Despite the early hour, his expression was grave, eyes darkened by the weight of recent events. "I heard you returned," Reed said quietly. "Anything we need to know?" Finch gestured to the fragment.
"It's no ordinary debris, not by a long stretch. Aris's tests show it's older than anything we've catalogued, and the isotopes suggest an origin beyond Earth's geological processes." Reed's brows furrowed, and he crossed to the table, fingertips hovering just above the plastic evidence bag. "If that's true, it means the phenomena we've seen, those UAPs, they're not aerial or extraterrestrial in the way we thought." "No," Finch replied. "It points to something neither human nor extraterrestrial, something older, deeper." The room fell into a contemplative silence, the distant hum of the building settling around them like a gentle wave. Reed finally broke it, voice low and steady. "Then we're at a crossroads. This isn't just a scientific puzzle anymore. It's a matter of national security." Eleanor tapped her pen against the notebook, a nervous habit that had surfaced more frequently in recent days. "It also means the cover-up isn't just about public panic. There's something they're protecting us from, or protecting themselves from." Finch nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "And we're trespassing where we weren't meant to go." The weight of their discoveries settled over the three of them like a dense fog. Finch's mind flickered back to the moment in the lab when Ara had revealed the data, an impossible truth that would fracture their complacency and redraw the boundaries of their reality. But here, in the quiet hum of this forgotten office, that truth felt like a living thing, coiled and watchful. The sharp ring of Finch's secured line shattered the fragile stillness. He reached into his jacket pocket, the worn fabric rough against his fingers, and answered with practiced calm. "Finch." The voice on the other end was smooth, precise, and chilling in its control. "Dr. Finch, Sterling, I trust you're well." Finch's body stiffened imperceptibly. The name carried the weight of decades. The man who had managed the shadows behind APRO, the gatekeeper of secrets. "Sir Malcolm." There was a pause, deliberate and measured. "I have been briefed on your recent activities. Your enthusiasm is commendable, but I must remind you that some stones are best left unturned." The words hung between them like an unspoken warning. Finch's fingers tightened around the phone. "Our duty is to pursue the truth, Sir Malcolm, regardless of discomfort." Sterling's voice was icy, but composed. "Truth is a luxury afforded only to those who can bear its consequences. I must inform you that APRO's funding is currently under review." Finch felt the weight of the threat, veiled but unmistakable. "Are you suggesting this is a direct consequence of our work?" "Consider it a necessary measure," Sterling replied smoothly. "Efficiency and focus must guide our limited resources. I would advise caution in your next steps." The line went dead before Finch could respond. He lowered the phone slowly, the room suddenly feeling colder, the shadows longer. The message was clear: retreat or risk obliteration. Eleanor and Reed watched him in silence, their faces unreadable. Finch folded his hands on the table, drawing strength from their shared resolve. "They're tightening the noose," he said quietly. "But we can't back down now. Reed let out a breath, a faint wry smile touching his lips. Well, I suppose this is what we signed up for. Eleanor nodded, pouring herself another cup of tea, the warmth a small rebellion against the chill in the room. She looked up at Finch. We move forward, but carefully. Finch reached for the evidence bag again, lifting it as if to offer it some reassurance. The fragment lay within, cool and inscrutable, its matte surface catching the light in strange, impossible ways. He traced a finger over the plastic, feeling the slight pulse beneath, a quiet signal that seemed to beckon them onward. Outside, the city stirred beneath a grey dawn, the hum of life continuing, unaware of the fragile truths being unravelled in a dim office filled with shadows. Finch's thoughts turned inward to the luminous shapes he had glimpsed years ago in a Cotswolds field, and to the path that now stretched out before them, a path lined with uncertainty, danger, and perhaps illumination. He would hold the fragment close, a silent talisman against the coming storm. The quiet signal was calling, and they would answer. The office smelled of old paper and stale coffee. The faint hum of the aging fluorescent light above, mingling with the distant, muted chatter of London waking up beyond the grimy window. Finch sat slumped in his chair, the worn corduroy of his jacket creaking softly as he leaned forward over the scarred wooden desk. The fragment rested in its plastic bag beside a clutter of scattered papers, a pale, jagged sliver that somehow seemed alive under the flickering light. Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the occasional scratch of Eleanor's pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook. Eleanor looked up, eyes sharp and clear despite the late hour. We're trapped in this system, aren't we? Any attempt to move forward, to share what we've found, and it all gets swept away, lost before it even reaches daylight. Her voice was steady, pragmatic, though there was an undercurrent of frustration. She folded her hands on the desk, the tapping ceasing, her gaze lingering on the fragment as if it held some secret beyond its inert form. Finch nodded slowly, tapping a finger against his lips. The chain of command is a labyrinth, layered with silence and fear. Sterling's warning wasn't just a threat, it was a lock snapping shut. He glanced at Reed, who stood near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the grey cityscape washed in early light. We need more evidence, more context, something concrete that can't be dismissed. Reed's jaw tightened. I've been thinking about my contacts in the RAF. People still in the service, retired pilots, radar operators. They're reluctant, of course, always have been. But I'll reach out quietly, see if anyone's heard whispers, seen things off the record. He turned away from the window, the cold light casting shadows across his face. No promises, but it's a start. Eleanor flipped open her notebook, her pen poised above the page. I'll begin compiling civilian reports, local newspapers, online forums, even social media. Patterns might emerge, something that official records overlook or suppress. She smiled faintly, tapping her pen once more. Data is our ally. It doesn't lie even when people do. Finch exhaled, rubbing his temples. I'm going back over the 1965 file. There must be something we missed. Something beneath the surface of those faded pages. He looked toward the cluttered shelves crammed with forgotten volumes and stacks of printouts. The past might hold the key to the present. The room felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in with each whispered conversation, each suppressed secret. The weight of decades of silence pressed down, thick and suffocating. Finch could almost hear the echoes of voices long gone, operators, analysts, soldiers, each one silenced under Sterling's invisible hand. The fragment caught the light again. its surface reflecting glimmers that danced like fleeting shadows. Eleanor reached out, her fingers hovering just above the plastic, as though she could sense the secrets locked within. "It's almost alive," she murmured. "Not in the sense we understand, but it pulses with history." Reed moved to the heater by the wall, rubbing his hands together against the biting chill that seeped through the old window frame. "If we're to make sense of this, we need to widen the circle, but carefully. One wrong move, and we risk everything. Not just the project, but our lives." His voice was low, measured, but the urgency was unmistakable. Finch rose, pacing slowly across the cramped office, the threadbare carpet muffling his footsteps. Sterling's fear isn't born of malice, but of panic. He believes the truth would unravel society, tear apart the fabric of understanding. But hiding it only deepens the wound. He stopped by the window, watching a lone raven hitch a ride on the wind above the city rooftops. "We have to be methodical, patient. The truth will not be won in a day." Eleanor's fingers danced over the keyboard as she began the first entries into the database, dates, locations, descriptions, each citing a thread in a growing tapestry. "This might take weeks, months even, but if we can trace the movement, the timing, match it against geomagnetic data, the anomalies in power grids, we might find the patterns Sterling's terrified to acknowledge." Reed nodded, dropping a folded page on the desk, a list of names and numbers culled from old service records, and whispered leads. "I've started contacting a few radar techs, pilots who've seen things that never made the official reports. They're scared to talk, but some want to believe. We'll tread lightly." Finch returned to the file cabinet, pulling out the battered folder marked 1965. The yellowed pages crackled softly in his hands. He sat back down, peering at the faded typewritten notes, the grainy photographs of radar blips and strange lights over the East Anglian coast. Something in the margins caught his eye,
An almost imperceptible annotation in Sterling's precise handwriting, a cryptic line about anomalous electromagnetic resonance and containment protocols. His mind wandered back to that summer night in 1986 in the Cotswolds field when a strange light had hovered just beyond reach. The memory was sharp, vivid, the oppressive quiet, the sudden surge of cold air, the sense that something ancient and watchful was waiting beneath the surface of the world. It was no longer just a childhood memory. It was a fragment of the puzzle he'd been chasing all these years. The air in the office shifted as Eleanor closed her laptop with a soft click. "I'm noticing clusters around fault lines and power substations," she said quietly. "It's as if the phenomena are drawn to those intersections, like the fragments' isotopic anomalies, something tied to the Earth's deeper rhythms." Reed listened, the lines around his eyes deepening. "We're dealing with something older than anything we imagined. Not aliens from some distant star, but something terrestrial, buried in the depths of our planet's history. It changes everything." The fragment's faint sheen seemed to glow in the morning light filtering through the window. Finch reached out, fingertips brushing the plastic bag. "We're trespassing in forbidden territory. Sterling's system is designed to keep it buried, to protect a fragile peace built on lies and silence." Eleanor met his gaze, her voice steady but resolute. "Then we have to become the system's blind spot, work from the shadows, build the evidence they can't brush aside." Reed's dark eyes flicked to the door, then back to the small group. "We need to trust each other more than ever. The moment this leaks, the whole operation will come down on us." He exhaled slowly, shadow of dry humor flickering. "Not exactly the team you want to pick for a friendly chat over tea." A faint smile curved Eleanor's lips. Speaking of tea, I could use the fresh pot. This silence is starting to sound like a verdict. Finch allowed himself a brief, tired smile. Tea sounds like a small mercy in a world gone mad with secrets. As Eleanor moved toward the battered kettle, Finch returned his attention to the 1965 file, tracing the faded ink and brittle edges, as if hoping the paper itself might whisper its truths. The fragment lay beside him, a silent sentinel amid the clutter, reminding him that their journey was just beginning, and the path ahead was shrouded in quiet, impenetrable shadows. Outside, the city breathed in the new day, indifferent to the fragile conspiracies unfolding in the cramped office. Somewhere beyond the walls, unseen and unheard, the ancient intelligence stirred beneath the waves, sending its quiet signal into the depths of the unknown. Finch closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft tick of the old clock on the wall, the distant hum of traffic, the faint scent of rain yet to fall. The quiet signal was waiting, patient and immutable, and so too was the truth they would find, or be crushed beneath. The office door creaked as Eleanor returned, balancing a tray with a steaming pot and 2 chipped mugs. Reed leaned against the radiator, the cold forgotten for a moment in the warmth of shared resolve. The fragment caught a final gleam of sunlight before the window clouded over, and the shadows crept once more into the corners of the room. They were tethered to this place, to each other, and to the mystery that would not be silenced. The pattern was forming, the pieces shifting, but the game was far from over. Outside, the wind stirred the skeletal branches of a tree, and somewhere beneath the surface, the quiet signal pulsed, waiting for a voice to answer. The worn leather chair beneath Eleanor creaked as she sank into it, the soft glow of her laptop screen casting pale light on her focused face. Outside the narrow window, a steady rain traced silver lines down the grimy glass, blurring the street lamps into smeared orbs. The musty smell of old paper and lingering tea mingled in the cramped APRO office, the silence punctuated only by the faint hum of the aging radiator breathing uneven warmth into the chilly room. Eleanor's fingers moved deliberately over the keyboard, entering coordinates, dates, times, and brief witness descriptions into the growing database. Each entry was a small story, a flicker of human experience against the vast unknown. She paused, her pen tapping rhythmically against the edge of her notebook. The monotony of data entry was broken only by the occasional thoughtful sip of lukewarm tea. Her mind sifted through the accumulating information. Clusters of sightings near fault lines, odd alignments with high-voltage power lines, strange electromagnetic pulses noted in obscure technical bulletins buried years ago. The pattern was not accidental. It was a map woven invisibly beneath the surface of England's green and grey countryside. The realization settled quietly but firmly in her chest. Across the room, Finch stood by the battered radiator, his hands clasped behind his back, pacing slowly over the creaking floorboards. His corduroy jacket was frayed at the cuffs, the fabric softened by years of wear. He spoke low, voice measured as always. These sightings, Eleanor, they're not random. The proximity to the power grid, there's a connection, a resonance perhaps. He stopped, eyes fixed on the murky outline of a power substation marked on the map pinned to the wall. It's as though the phenomena are drawn to specific energy nodes, tapping into the lifeblood of the network. Eleanor nodded, eyes never leaving her screen. I've cross-referenced the dates with geomagnetic data from the British Geological Survey. There's a subtle but consistent elevation in readings preceding most sightings. It's faint, but it's there. She tapped the pen against her notebook again, a soft staccato in the quiet. This could explain why the government has been so intent on suppression. The implications go beyond simple unknown aircraft. This signals something deeper, something terrestrial. Reed entered the room quietly, his RAF uniform freshly pressed, despite the long day. The scent of damp wool and leather filled the small space as he shrugged off his jacket and hung it carefully on a hook. His face was drawn, thoughtful, in a way that belied his usual practical demeanor. He settled heavily into the chair opposite Eleanor, running a hand through his dark hair. "I met with an old squadron mate today," he began, voice low. "Someone who's seen things but never spoke of them outside the mess." Finch looked up, interest sharpening in his pale eyes beneath the thick brow. "And what did he say? What's the culture among pilots regarding these incidents?" Reed exhaled slowly, choosing his words. "There's a kind of silent folklore, unspoken but understood. Pilots talk about the shimmer or ghost flights in hushed tones, but it's understood you keep your distance. Official reports are rare because the consequences are severe, career-ending, even dangerous. But among us there's an unspoken agreement to shield one another. The strange encounters are part of the job, a shared secret." He smiled wryly. "They call it the quiet signal. No one knows where it comes from, but everyone's seen it." The phrase hung in the stale air like a whispered confession. Finch rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The quiet signal? Poetic, in a grim way. It fits. That's what we're chasing. The faint hum beneath the static. He glanced toward the metal fragment on the desk, its smooth surface catching the low light. The official records are just the surface. Beneath them lies a subterranean world of experience, half hidden in silence. Eleanor closed her laptop gently, the screen fading to black. "We need to build on this. The cultural silence, the data, the fragment, they're all threads of the same tapestry. If we can map the unofficial reports alongside our data, we might see the full pattern." She tapped her pen against the wood once more. "It's not just about sightings anymore, it's about understanding an intelligence that's been here long before us." Reed's gaze drifted towards the rain-streaked window, where darkness deepened. "My mate told me stories of pilots refusing to discuss incidents, even with their families. The fear isn't just professional, it's existential. The unknown is woven into the fabric of their lives, a quiet dread they carry like a shadow." He leaned forward, voice barely above a murmur. "It makes you wonder what Sterling and his people have been trying to protect. If the truth came out..." Finch's jaw tightened. "It would shake the foundations of belief. That's why they suppress it. Not out of malice, but fear. Fear of chaos, collapse, the unraveling of order." He turned away, pacing again, the floorboards creaking underfoot. "But we must not let fear dictate the truth. We owe it to history, to ourselves." The room fell into a reflective silence, broken only by the faint ticking of an old wall clock and the distant rumble of thunder. Eleanor reached for the fragment, tracing its cold surface with a finger. "This little piece of metal is a key, a relic of the hidden intelligence beneath us. We're starting to see the outlines of something vast and ancient, a presence that has shaped the world in ways we barely understand." Reed nodded slowly. "And the pilots, their stories, their silence. It's as if they're the unwitting custodians of this secret, caught between fear and fascination." He rubbed his temples wearily. "It's a lonely place to be." Finch turned back to them, eyes bright despite the weight of the moment. "Then we must be their voice, the blind spot in Sterling's system, the ones who refuse to look away. This is why APRO exists." Eleanor smiled faintly, the tension easing for a moment. "We are the quiet signal too, listening, watching, waiting. The rain intensified outside, the soft patter against the window like a distant heartbeat. The city's muted lights flickered through the mist of the world, unaware of the slow unfolding beneath its surface. They sat together, a fragile alliance against the vast unknown, each drawing strength from the others. Reed stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Tomorrow, I'll reach out to more contacts, radar operators, technicians. If there's a network of silence, I want to find the threads. He glanced at Finch. We need every piece we can get. Finch nodded, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And Eleanor, continue refining the database. Look for anomalies, patterns we might have missed. The devil is in the details. The room grew darker as the lamps flickered on, casting long shadows across the cluttered desks. Eleanor refilled her teacup, the steam curling upward in a fragile spiral. This is only the beginning, she said softly. But the pattern is emerging. Finch looked toward the worn map on the wall, the pins marking sightings glowing faintly under the lamplight. The quiet signal is calling, he murmured, and we must answer. Outside, the rain softened to a mist, the night folding around the city like a whispered secret. Somewhere beneath the earth, the ancient intelligence pulsed on, silent and watchful. Within the cramped walls of the APRO office, a small team prepared to pierce the veil of silence and reveal the truth that had long been buried in shadow. Rain pattered steadily against the tall, narrow windows of the APRO office, turning the glass into a blur of dripping rivulets. The soft hum of the aging radiator mingled with the faint tapping of Eleanor's pen on her notebook, a quiet rhythm punctuating the night. Outside, the city's muted glow seeped through the clouds, painting the wet streets with a ghostly amber light. Finch stood by the cluttered desk, his familiar corduroy jacket hanging loosely over his shoulders, eyes fixed on the flickering screen where a terse email awaited his attention. The subject line was precise, cold. MOD budget review. APRO funding. He swallowed and broke the seal. The message was brief, the tone formal. Sir Malcolm Sterling's signature was unmistakable. The review was thorough and unforgiving. APRO's future was uncertain. Funds might be withdrawn within weeks. Finch's fingers trembled slightly as he reread the words that felt like a noose tightening around their fragile operation. The meeting with Sterling had been clinical, his voice measured but resolute. Transparency is a luxury we cannot afford, Sterling had said, his gaze steady, his words an unyielding stone wall. Eleanor looked up from her notes, her brow furrowed in concern. Weeks? That's all we have? Her voice was quiet but firm, the weight of the impending closure settling heavily in the cramped, paper-laden room. Outside, the rain seemed to soften, as if the storm itself were holding its breath. Reed rubbed the back of his neck, the leather of his RAF jacket creaking softly. They want to bury it all, again. His tone was dry, but a flicker of frustration flashed in his eyes. Finch's mind churned in the half-light. The metal fragment lay on the table between them, cold and enigmatic, a silent testament to truths long suppressed. He glanced at it, tracing the irregular edges with a finger. The fragment was more than evidence. It was a key. But time was slipping through their fingers like the rain outside. He paced slowly, the worn floorboards creaking beneath his steps, each footfall measured, reflective. We can't let this die, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. We need to reach beyond this room, Finch said finally, turning to face them. If the government won't speak, someone else must. Someone who understands the importance of disclosure without sensationalism. Eleanor nodded, her pen still tapping, thoughts already racing through her analytical mind. Reed's jaw tightened. You mean a journalist? That's a risk. His voice was low, wary. Yes, Finch replied, eyes steady. A journalist who can hold the story with care, present it as a question of transparency, not sensational UFO hysteria. The silence that followed was thick, charged with unspoken fears and the fragile hope of breaking through decades of silence. Eleanor's gaze was sharp, discerning. Do you have someone in mind? Finch reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, its edges softened by age. Simon Drake, Fleet Street, experienced, cautious. He's known to be discreet. Reed exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a